Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borak Thang, Earthlets, and welcome to the latest episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast Lockdown Tapes. I am your host, Maltjar, and on this episode, we're diving back into the archives. Now, a couple of returners to 2000 AD in the magazine recently. First off, we're going to go back to an interview that we did with Gordon Rennie about Angelic, which is his kind of, his reimagining of the origins of, maybe the Angel Gang. Or maybe not. Who knows? The new series has just started in Judge Dredd Megazine. So I thought it'd be interesting to go back to the beginning and revisit that interview. And then we have a nice, long, big interview with artist Robin Smith, who's somebody who was there for the early days of 2000 AD as art editor, but also is an artist in his own right. I interviewed him a few years ago, and he recently returned for the 2000 AD Sci-Fi Special, which is still available despite selling out from the 2000 AD web shop. So it's great to revisit that one, actually. Really fascinating chat with one of those stalwarts of 2000 AD, worked on Dredd, Bad City Blue, which is a series that he did the art on, is out soon as a digital-only release from the web shop and app, so do make sure you check that out as well. So plenty of reasons to revisit these interviews. In the meantime, I hope you've seen the news. First off, there's the 2000 AD Humble Bundle, which is available from Humble Bundle. This is basically you pay what you want up to a certain point, and you get loads of digital collections from 2000 AD. This one is a bit like the one that we did last year, but this one's a lot more Dredd focused. So you get some classics like Zenith and Halo Jones and Maze World and Scarlet Traces in there, but the vast bulk is Dredd World stuff. And that's been going absolutely great guns. And the added bonus is that you raise money for charity with your purchase, which is always good. So head along to 2080.com to see details about that. And also the pre-order for the Brian Bolland, the Judge Dredd by Brian Bolland Apex Edition, Slipcase Edition, is now up on the website. This is just going to be the most extraordinary, beautiful kind of, those artist editions that IDW has done for many years. Oversized, beautiful scans of original artwork. We're talking classic pages. Gaze into the Fist of Dread is the obvious one, but also things like Brian's covers for the Eagle comic reprints in the 1980s, which introduced a whole other countries to the world of Judge Dredd. The slipcase edition comes with a bound piece of newly commissioned art that's signed and numbered by Brian. So, it's just going to be a wonderful book. The standard non-slipcase edition, minus the signature and the piece of art and the number, and the slipcase is going to go on sale in October. For release, both of these for release for February next year. Already wonderful to see how excited everybody is being about this. It's kind of we did the Zenith Apex edition a number of years ago, but this is something else entirely. So really looking forward to that. So if you have the money, go and order it. If you don't, go and talk to yourself at 2000ad.com. So we're going to crack on now with our archive interviews. First off with Gordon Rennie, the writer on Angelic and many other stories for 2000 AD, and then the artist Robin Smith. So we'll be back in 7 days' time with more from the Galaxy's greatest podcast. And until then, Earthlet, Splundig Verthrig.
Angelic. Talk about the origin of this series, because I was talking to Matt, our editor, and he said that you drew some inspiration from the Hannibal TV series.
Yeah, that's right. I was a big fan of Hannibal. Well, up until the third series when I absolutely lost the plot of what was going on. But I like the idea that they played about with continuity really early on. In the first series, there was little hints that it wasn't actually in continuity with the what we knew from the movies. One character changed gender, one character changed race, but these are sort of minor things. The second series became really obvious where it was going off in its own continuity completely, alternate timeline. Yeah. And I thought it'd be interesting to do that with a character in 2000 AD, one that's been, I think, not particularly well served, in the past. So I decided in the Angel gang, and specifically at Pat Angel. They've always been kind of, comedy redneck psychos, and that kind of ran into the ground, I think, in the end, which is why we've not seen them in years and years, and I think John's pensioned or killed them all off. So I want to go back to the origins of them and try and do it a different take. Basically do Pat Angel as the hero, not the villain.
Right, okay. Because you did a whole slew of Mean Machine Angel stories.
It was Mean Machine. Yeah, they were just in the usual kind of like comedy psycho vein. I think that's played out with those characters now. I'd like to do something more sort of mature and serious and interesting with them. Sure.
And so far, we've only met Pa Angel, and
he's not even called Pa. He's never ever called Pa Angel. You don't see the scripts, of course, so you just don't. He's just called Angel. So it's an important differentiation. Is that a word? I don't know. That we don't call him that. He's not necessarily Pa Angel. He's just Angel or Mr. Angel. I don't actually like calling him Pa Angel at all. I know people do it in reviews. Naturally, of course, they do. But he's not actually Pa Angel. He's someone slightly different.
Right. Okay.
If that makes sense.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, the family isn't together yet. He's not yet the patriarch of that family.
He's just a different character. He's not the kind of horrible, evil, psychotic patriarch we see later on, and he might not become that character,
right? Which
is an important thing in the story as well. It's an alternate timeline where these things might not happen.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting angle. The idea of not humanizing these characters, but explaining them to a certain extent.
Yes, I wanted to do. I wanted to show why he might have become like that. It's all about the family and his background, which he's lost his memory. He's a Texas City gangster who was shot in the head by corrupt judges and has basically lost his memory. He's rebuilding his life and rebuilding a family that he's lost as well in Texas City. His wife and child were killed. So he's basically searching for a new family. So that's that's the core of the character, is family and protecting those around him, which makes him a much more human character.
Yeah, even when sort of bringing that family together essentially brings together some of the most evil people you can imagine.
Well, it might go that way, or it might not.
Okay. Interesting.
This isn't the definitive origin of the Angel family, which is why even the title is Angelic, is angel-like, is what Angelic means, not necessarily an angel.
Right. Okay. So you can't really dismiss the series of going, well, we know how that ends up, because as far as you're concerned, it might not go that way.
In the very first series, there's a psyker character who can see the future, but he says the future's changing. He sees the judge child and things like that, but it's all shifting. It might not happen that way.
Okay.
Which is the purpose of the story.
Because this isn't your first rodeo, so to speak. You've done a lot of series set in this kind of pseudo Wild West of the Cursed Earth, and bringing in elements from Texas City, because you did Missionary Man and Cursed Earth Coburn and things like that. So explain what your fascination is, not just with the Cursed Earth, but with this kind of southern stereotype of lawless rednecks.
I don't know if it's a fascination, but I do keep on coming back to it. I mean, as you point out, I've always done a series set in that milieu. My rule is only to do one at a time, so I never did Mystery Man and Cursed Earth Coburn at a time. Cursed Earth Coburn's been pensioned off and would never get Angelic. The rule is never do more than one of these series at a time.
Right.
I don't know why I keep on coming back to it, to be honest. I do like the Cursed Earth as a setting, so I've always, from the very beginning of my work for 2000 AD, the magazine, have always been the Cursed Earth. I like it's a sort of primal, apocalyptic, almost Old Testament-like landscape, which I think Westerns are very much about as well.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? That so many of the tropes of the Cursed Earth are now essentially Western tropes. Yes. It used to be a place where anything went. So you'd have dinosaurs and volcanoes, and then glass cities that melted and things like that. But now it's very firmly a kind of future Wild West.
Yeah, John Wagner Pat Mills made it kind of crazy and weird, but John kind of roped it into a very Western setting. There's settlements and plantations and herds of animals being with cowboys and things like that.
And with the Angel Gang, I mean, you mentioned earlier about the fact you don't think they've been particularly well served. What is it about the characters of the Angel Gang that you like?
Well, I always did quite like the comedy redneck thing, but that only went so far. I think with Mean Machine, and I'm part of the problem, he tipped it too far to comedy. He just became a caricature, really. He's not a particularly deep character, to be fair, so I think it was fair enough when John pensioned him off in the strip. But we don't really know much about the rest of the Angel Gang, which is why I wanted to go back to them. And especially with Pa, who's it just seems to be this horrible, evil patriarch. And I wanted to do more with them.
Is the extreme violence and the viciousness of them, is that an appealing thing as a writer, that you can kind of let loose and do really quite nasty things?
It is a violent strip. The first series is very violent. Angel gets tortured, and the second series he meets this other family who are basically a future version of the Angel. He's seeing a vision of his own future. Right. They're basically the Angel Gang, and he gets very nasty towards the end. He's a very, very violent character. I mean, that's why he becomes what he becomes. But at the moment, he has this moral core that reins in the violence or gives it a reason. Okay. He only does nasty things to people who are worse than him at the moment. That's how he stays on the side of the Angels.
Right. Okay. So is it a kind of the more you kind of tread in the mud, the muddier you get kind of thing?
Yes. Yeah. So whether you see which way he'll fall in the end,
right? Okay.
Or if he will fall.
Let's talk a little bit about Lee Carter's artwork on the series, because he's got quite a well, he has a unique style in that he uses computers, but it doesn't result in things feeling all that stiff. There's a lot of detail there.
It doesn't look all Photoshoppy, which some of that kind of artwork does, I feel. It's been great working with Lee. He mapped out the entire the second series. A lot of it takes place in this ranch where the bad guys live, the Creek family, who are this surrogate angel family, and he mapped out the entire thing digitally. He built it as a digital model. So I thought, well, we better start using this. If he's put hours and hours in to build this thing. So that was very impressive, and I could actually see what the setting looked like, before. I think I'd done the first episode by this point, but the remaining episodes I could see what the location looked like, which was really impressive. It's great working with Lee. It started. I can't remember. I hadn't worked with him in comics before. I'd worked with him in computer games. He used to work at a games company in Liverpool as an artist who I did some work for there. So that's how I got to know him. And then I knew he wanted to do comics. And now he's doing comics, so good for him. It started with, I talked to him. He produced this amazing sketch character concept for him. And it was basically Yojimbo. Or no, it wasn't Yojimbo. It was Baby Cart. It was this old kind of warrior guy carrying a kid on his shoulders, and that was Angel and his adopted son Link. So that was kind of like the samurai with baby kind of feel we're going for. And that's what really sparked it all off in my imagination after talking to him about it.
Because that's the opening page of the first episode of the first series.
Yes, that was going to be the image that really sort of defined the story, I thought.
With Lee's stuff, as the first series went on, and now that we're into the second, are you both on the same page, kind of thing? You know, have you now developed enough of a working relationship where you can kind of trust him to deliver that world without much direction? Yeah.
That's the artists I tend to work with more and more, or that's how I got on with them. You know, I just kind of trust them to get on with it. My scripts aren't super detailed. I kind of know what they're going to produce, and I trust them. You know, people like PG Hold. Well, not PJ. I'm always disparaging PJ, but rightly so. He's terrible. And Tiernan Trevelyan, you know, people I got on, and Simon Colby, people I like to work with again and again. I just going to write the script, and I know what they're going to produce. I'm pretty confident in them.
I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned just now about Lee mapping out the environment. I'm curious what effect that had on you as a writer, because normally, you know, you carry this stuff in your head, or, you know, I don't know if you sketch a rough idea of where things are out just in case it gets too complicated. But what was the effect of actually being able to see and essentially walk through the environment on the way that you wrote the series? Normally sometimes there's a problem kind of choreographing action when you don't actually know what the scene's going to look like. It was much easier this one, especially in the last episode of the current series. There's quite a bit of choreographed action, and I had to know who was where, and the model was really useful in that respect. Even I think added something into it that wasn't in the original model. We'll see if anyone notices it appears between episodes. And with one thing I was curious about when I was just sort of coming up with some questions was Judge Dredd especially has almost 40 years of continuity behind it, which John and Alan and various other people have either played on or ignored or twisted or whatever. Is there sometimes a risk that that by going back you're just kind of churning over the same characters? Because as you say, you felt the Angel characters have been played out. Can you return too often to the source?
Yes, you can, and try not to do in this. But basically, we're erasing continuity. I know people will run screaming to the hills at the sound of that, and kind of rewriting it. So, as I say, things won't happen the way you think they're going to happen. I think in Angelic,
right?
If it might be an alternate timeline. There's a saying that I heard once about comics, and sometimes continuity ties your best writers to your worst writers. You know, you're obliged to. So I don't necessarily feel bound by that.
Okay. And looking aside from Angelic for a moment, more Absalom in the future.
Yes, there's a collection out next year, so we better finish it off. I think it looks like it's heading towards a conclusion, Absalom.
Okay.
Tiernan and I have talked about it. I know he's doing something else at the moment, and I'm doing about 16 other things, but it will see a conclusion in the foreseeable future. And we'll pension off old Harry, send him off to his dotage.
I mean, is that important for you as a writer to be able to kind of shuttle these people off and park them somewhere?
I don't know. There's this terrible fear of going on and just writing the same thing over and over again. I think stories should have a conclusion if need be. I think we've talked about this before. Maybe I go too far too and just like kill off strips and move on to new things too much. But I don't want to be writing Absalom 20 years from now, because that would be awful.
The last time we talked, I think you mentioned about how you were walking away from Dreadworld stuff because you part Cursed Earth Coburn, you weren't going to be writing Judge Dredd anymore, and yet Angelic is still set in that world. It's still got judges. It's still part of that universe.
It's its own separate continuity. It's my little sub-universe.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily and because it's set in the past as well. It's not affected by any giant mega events that are going to happen.
Right. Okay. So even though you've got actual judges walking around, it's a different world.
Judges in the first season. I'm not anticipating seeing many judges from now on.
Right. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
start off by talking a bit about your background, because we just talked a little bit about it, but Port Sunlight is an interesting place to come from.
Well, Port Sunlight, my family lived in Port Sunlight my grandparents lived there for 70 years, I think, in the end.
Was that because of a connection to the
Lever Brothers? Yeah, my grandfather was an accountant for Lever Brothers.
Oh, right, okay.
And if you work for Lever Brothers, you got a house in the village.
Right.
So you got the sort of fantastic house in the village.
Yeah.
But probably the best council houses in the country, because they're really nice, in a village with an open-air heated swimming pool, with an art gallery, it's a lovely place.
Yeah. And in terms of your childhood, I mean, you mentioned the art gallery there. It's an obvious line to draw between having a resource like that as a child and your profession now, or was it more kind of it's always there, we sometimes go?
No, it was actually Ron Courtine, the guy that ran the pub in the village, was friendly with people on the American Air bases, so he used to come back with lots and lots of comics.
Right.
So from about 3 onwards in 1960, I just grew up on Marvel and DC comics, boxes and boxes of them. So I just loved comics from that age. So that's really I always liked comics.
So it wasn't the Grand Old Masters, it was the new Masters.
No, I did come to like pre-Raphaelite painting and things very much, and it's a fantastic place to go and look, because it is a great gallery. I recommend it to anybody. I mean, there's there's other good galleries around Merseyside and things, but so no, it was the comics that used to come from American bases.
Right. And was art the obvious thing that you wanted to do? Was it something that you wanted to do since you was?
Yeah, I always wanted to do art. Yeah.
Okay. What was your family's reaction to that? I'm always curious about what parents think of.
Well, my mother was a librarian,
okay.
And as long as I read, I could read comics, right? So because I read everything that was going, so I could read comics. No, there's no problems with that. My father was more difficult because he was an engineer.
Right.
And he said, "Oh, you do art, or you can do architecture." I go, "No, I don't want to do art, commercial art of some sort. I'd want to do comics, but it'd be commercial art." So, yeah, it was commercial art because they hadn't invented graphics at that point.
Right.
So, well, they hadn't invented graphics; they just hadn't called it graphics.
Yeah. Tell me a bit about the process of how you actually came to be working as an artist. I mean, did you go to art school?
Well, we moved to Norfolk because my father went to work from Lever Brothers to Bird's Eye, which is part of Unilever.
Yeah.
And I went to art college there because you had to do your foundation at the local college. Couldn't get a grant, so I had to do graphics at the local college. So I did that I left school at 17 and had finished art college by 21 and moved to London looking for a job.
Right. Okay.
In comics.
Dad was an engineer, Mum was a librarian, living in somewhere like Port Sunlight, grandfather an accountant. I mean, was this a kind of classic kind of northern middle class upbringing?
I guess so. I mean, everybody has a profession. Everybody does a job, and my family's actually littered with accountants, and I'm almost innumerable. Well, I'm actually not now, but I professed to be for many years because it's not something that ever appealed to me.
Yeah.
But I think I always liked art. I always liked graphic art. I always loved comics. I think it's probably comics. I mean, the other comic, obviously, apart from the American comics, the British comics I had, one of the first one I can remember having was Play Hour. And I'm pretty certain that Colin White was working on it when I used to read Play Hour, from the discussions we've had of it. Yeah. And then it was TV comic, TV 21. Yeah. The only comic that was on subscription was Look and Learn, which obviously had fantastic artwork in it, which I think everybody came to appreciate later. Obviously slightly worthy, but it was fantastic, the stuff that was in there. And then it ended up with strips like the Trigon Empire and I can't remember this. It merged with Ranger in the way that comics got merged and things, which I obviously didn't know then, but obviously I came to understand later.
And in terms of the American stuff, what were the things that really caught your fancy?
I just liked it all. I liked everything, but I was lucky enough because of the age I was to have all as well as the DC. I grew up on all the very early Fantastic Fours, Spider-Mans. I remember seeing X-Men for the first time. Daredevil, I had loads of the first issues of Dredd. I've looked at the first 10 issues, I would say.
Yeah.
And no, I haven't. I took them to the swap shop and bought Beatles albums with the proceeds, before you ask.
So you've kind of got this interest in comics, in graphics, in graphic design. You come to London looking for your first job.
Well, actually, what I wanted to do was go to art college, and
Right.
I compromised on commercial art of some sort, so it's graphics. But that's because my wife's grandfather was the fine art professor at the Slade, and he decided that people going to art college and learning to draw was probably not the best idea, so everybody should do something vocational, so everybody should have a purpose. So he did actually go to his death thinking that all art students hated him for it, so that hence you ended up doing a foundation, which is fantastic, and then 3 years of graphics. I mean, the 3 years of graphics I did were about how to write a business letter, as I recall, and use Pantone. You know, it's that sort of, it was kind of, didn't really learn anything about drawing, but, you know, it was still great fun.
I'm interested in that element of compromise you mentioned about commercial art, because one thing I noticed in interviews you've done before, and certainly my experience of your work in 2000 AD with so many of the star scans and the adverts that you did. I mean, you were even doing adverts for the Transformers.
Title. Yes, I draw lots of that stuff.
Did you always see yourself as kind of straddling that kind of commercial and creative?
I think I just drew anything that was going.
Right.
I've always done freelance. I've always done quite a lot of advertising and marketing stuff, just because you get the opportunity to do it, and you just do anything that's going, really.
Sure.
I mean, sadly, I was once asked if I wanted to go and do some storyboards, and I wasn't told what it was for, and I was drawing a transforming robot story for Dave Hunt on Eagle. I can't remember what this thing was at the end of Eagle. I think it was Eagle. Anyway, it was definitely Dave Hunt. And in fact, what I didn't go and draw was didn't go and do the visualising for the Division Bell that Pink Floyd sleeve. So you end up doing whatever comes first, don't you?
Yeah.
So yeah, you kind of, I used to do all the. You look at the covers I did. I was the art editor.
Yeah, exactly.
So if they needed a Bubblicious cover with some Star Wars stuff on it, I'm going to do it because it's easier for us to do it in the office and do it like that.
So what was your first proper job? If you need, you can call it a proper job. I don't know.
You mean first proper job?
Straight out of art college.
Well, my first proper job out of art college was 2000 AD.
Right.
I went to the King's Reach Tower after going to these various. I went through the Artists and Writers Yearbook at the local library, and it was out of date. And I wrote to all the publishers of comics I could find in it, asking for an interview because I wanted to work to learn more about comics and how they're produced.
Yeah.
All the letters ended up in IPC. Well, DC Thompson, I think, offered me an interview, and IPC had sort of amalgamated 2 or 3 different companies. And so basically, all my applications or letters requesting at least an interview ended up in the same place. So I moved to London, and 3 weeks later, I had an interview with Kelvin Gosnell. I think Bob Bartholomew, who was the group editor or maybe the publisher, and I'm trying to think somebody else. It was probably Steve McManus because he just started working on 2000, and I got a job on 2000.
Right.
And Calvin looked at my portfolio and said, "You should go and work in advertising because if you come here, you'll just end up bodging things." I thought that sounds good to me. on a very good salary as well.
Without giving too much away, what kind of rate were you on as first job straight about?
Well, I can't remember, but I know that I was getting paid more than any of my friends that were out of college. And they were working in advertising, marketing. It was a decent salary. It was a decent salary with a pension and great sick pay benefits, training. You did the IPC. We called it the indoctrination course, but I think it was induction, where you had to get on a coach and go out to the printers with everybody else. You'd go and see how the guys that did the process worked. So you learned how black and white artwork was shot with the old kind of brass and walnut camera. It was great. So you learned all of it like that.
Because the process now is so fundamentally different. How to produce comics. So for those of us who are listening and
perhaps a bit younger and don't remember the old school way of doing things, what was the process of putting a comic together?
Well, the process was, because there were letterpress comics, which means they were all printed from line plates. And the process was, for the artwork, it had to be drawn on Bristol board, between 1.5 and 1 3/4 up. Maybe Ian Gibson used to sometimes draw twice up, but pretty much over scale, so it could be lettered. Drawn with Indian ink, permanent, with a brush, with a pen, on, as I said, plate finished Bristol board. And it was drawn with Indian inks, so when the cleaner came into the office and poured a cup of coffee over it, it could be wiped clean without losing the image. And this is absolutely true.
Right.
So it always had to be permanent. But when you finished a page of artwork and it went to the letterers, obviously you only had to draw the artwork and put it on a piece of board. Now artists have to spend $2,000 on a Mac computer, scan it themselves, and do all the process work for the publisher. So it was quite sort of, we could do it a bit cheaper and a bit easier in those days.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, before we started recording, we were chatting about, I don't know, a certain degree of nostalgia for the way these companies used to operate, because it's not just that for artists and writers things are very different now, but also for editorial things are very, very different. What was the kind of, I don't know, the hierarchy, the structure, the you're coming in as a somebody straight out of art college. Where did you slot into this?
Well, as we had on the staff, there was Steve was the editor, Steve McManus. Roy Preston was the sub. Colin Wyatt was the art editor, and I was Colin's assistant.
Yeah.
And then obviously you get the structure over that. So then there's the managing editor, which was Barry Tomlinson, was the editor of the whole of the Youth Club. I think he preferred his football comics, if we're truthful about this. And it was hierarchical from then on. So basically, if somebody complained at the top, it all came right down to us. And Steve used to take most of the flack, 'cause he was the editor, obviously. But I mean, we all felt for him a lot and things. And it was good. But the weirdest thing when you started working was the culture of going out to the pub at lunchtime, particularly with Roy Preston and his gin and tonics. It was a really weird thing. And of course, the Kingsreach Tower, subsidised canteen, even fantastic restaurant. It was great. You could eat cheap. Even it was just everything was there, and you just got in there with a fantastic view from the 20th floor of the building over the city. And it was pretty okay working. It was good. But obviously we had. It's a weekly comic, 52 times a year. It's got to be published. So obviously there's, you just have to stay on it. Yeah. I don't think we missed any. Maybe when there's strike, there's a couple of issues, but I don't think we missed any in the years I worked there. So,
just referencing that, probably, what did you call it? The Slug and Gristle.
Yeah, John Wagner christened it that. It was actually called the Railway Tavern. I tried to remember this the other day, and I think you mentioned something to me about your offices having water running down the walls.
Yeah, the old ones, yeah.
Yeah, well, Lucy, my wife, had never been in the Slug and Gristle till it was just closing. They were turning it into a wine bar. And we were having to go down to South London for something. And I said, look, some of the guys are in there, let's just pop in for a drink. There's a thunderstorm, water came down the walls, everything, all the electrics went, so that was it. So we saw the end of the Slug and Gristle. But it used to be, we'd go over there at lunchtimes and play pool. If you went in order of who was best at pool, I would say that Tom Frame was definitely best at pool, but then he'd spent more time in pubs.
Right, yeah.
John Wagner was pretty damn good at pool. The rest of us were, I think we were all pretty good, actually. Simon Geller was the pinball wizard. I didn't understand you could be taught to make a pinball machine do your will. Right. He did it. He should show people how to do it. He'd go in, he'd set up the machine for as many free games as anybody wanted for the next 2 hours. Really and honestly, that's the thing. Unfortunate, but there was that thing. It was a bit weird going to the pub, but we did. We always got back, and generally got back, and if we had to work, and you wouldn't do it if it was deadline day or whatever. But we used to do these unfortunate things. Like we decided it would be a good idea to have a pool tournament against Marvel. So we decided we were obviously much better at pool.
Yeah.
And we did drinking and things, and they were all a bit sort of nicer and a bit sort of sort of mummy's boys. I think it was the thing. So we organised this thing. We get there. I remember making this trophy. I scrounged a pool ball off the publican. I got a great big nut. I screwed the thing on. I got one of those little Dredd figurines. I sprayed the thing. It was a beautiful thing. They turned up with an inflatable Spider-Man sort of. You can push it over and it'll stand up again. Right? And I thought, this is just rubbish. Okay, but we proceeded to play pool. We played 4 games of. We played singles first. Then had to stop for drink, and then we played doubles afterwards. And we just carried on drinking, and they didn't. and unfortunately, we got beaten. And the same thing happened the next 2 years. So we couldn't not do the drinking. It was good fun, though.
I mean, again, that very kind of romantic notion of, publishing lunches and just heading down the pub for a few hours. I think it's in Steve McManus's book, he says, would guiltily look at the clock and it'd say 2:30 and probably need to go back to work.
Well, that's when the pubs closed, remember? Remember, pubs fortunately closed. If we needed to carry on, this was the worst thing. It would usually, if you went out for a lunch with an agent or you went out with one of the artists or whatever, the only place you could drink in the afternoons was the City Golf Club, which is one of the city sort of press clubs behind Fleet Street. And somebody had membership. I think Steve probably had membership, but we'd go over to the City Golf Club and they had a pool table and a ticket tape machine. And we'd end up playing pool with the English desk of the National Enquirer. National Enquirer? Yeah, National Enquirer. Yeah. It was this bloke called, American, was he Canadian? Bloke called Noel. And he'd do things like, oh, you beat me, we'll play a 10 or a corner. It was all this sort of, and then you go out in the evening, you carry on and you go to. And this is how Tom Frame got lost with the journalist Hugh McIlvenney once for several days with some artwork. Okay. It was a continuation of one of these days.
Explain, I need to know more about that.
Well, all I can say is, as I recall, Tom had a portfolio of artwork. He ends up going off with Hugh McIlvenney, who I think owned a restaurant at the time. I think Hugh McIlvenney was a respected and very good sports journalist. I'm going to say he worked for the Times, or I can't remember whether he worked. I don't think he worked for the Guardian. He worked for one of the newspapers. Anyway, he and Tom hit off. They went to his restaurant. They ended up going out, and Tom just disappeared, but with a portfolio with some of Mick McMahon's Judge Dredd story that was supposed to be lettered. I mean, this is the stuff that everybody's always talked about, right?
Yeah.
I know when Tom came to, it was in the hotel at St. Catherine's Dock, which was the one that's featured in what's the gangster film with Bob Hoskins and Helen Mirren? You can insert the
yes, yeah. I'll put that in at a later.
Good Friday. Good Friday. Yeah. Okay. Longer Friday. He turns up there, but with no portfolio of artwork, right? And so it's that thing. We're desperate because we need the artwork still. Mick actually redraws it same size, which is no mean feat, over I think probably a weekend, would be 6 pages of artwork. Yeah. And so he redraws it. Now I'm in Tufnell Park, which is just up the hill from Kentish Town. So I went down to Tom's normal pub, the Assembly House in Kentish Town, and I tried to find the artwork. They said, well, he was in here earlier at some point in that evening. He was here, and he seemed to be carrying something. It's not here. And I thought, well, we'll go around. So I walked up, and there was a pizza takeaway. I went to the pizza takeaway and said, he said, oh, is this yours? And there it was. It managed to get to the pizza place. So at some point over that period, that's where the artwork was. But it was too late by then because Mick had redrawn it. I can't remember if he got the original relettered or...
The Assembly House seems to be the kind of crux of so many similar stories, because there's the one about the City of the Damned artwork that it was when Steve and Tom had been out in the Assembly House, and
I think Steve was hanging at Dylan's for ages. At Tom's for ages, and it was. Do you know what? I could find Tom there any time. Right. Okay, so much so that my older daughter, who was studying medicine at UCL, used to have to go up to the Whittington Hospital in Archway. It's one of the hospitals she's based in. Yeah. And ever since then, she'd go past, and this is these many years later, she still goes past there. And she still says hello, Tom, because it's a family tradition. And it's kind of like, and people go, what are you doing there? I'm saying hello to Tom, who is a really good friend of my dad's. Oh, was he in that? No, he's actually dead, but his sort of spirit's probably lingered on.
More than likely. So, you became art editor in what, 1980?
When Colin, you see, Colin's fantastic. Disney artist, and he did fantastic young children's stuff and things, and he really wanted to do that.
Yeah.
So he left, and I got to be art editor. But I mean, he'd let me do lots of stuff before that, and Doug Church, who was the group art editor, always let me do stuff. He'd always come and get me to do stuff for other comics and around the place and things, which was good. Only because he knew I liked that stuff more than he probably did. So
at this stage, when you step up to this position, how do things change? Obviously, you become in charge of a lot more, but is it just that you get to call any shots now, or is it just that your workload increases?
No, I was doing exactly pretty much the same as I was probably doing. The only thing is, I got to be in charge of the stationery order. So no, I did. Cole let me, because the thing is, Cole let me, because Alan was working, and Alan and I worked. Steve had to do the boring stuff. Like, he had to deal with the gobby writers usually, and gave him a lot of misery. Yeah. Whereas Alan and I got on with doing the rest of it and things, and that was great, because working with Alan was terrific. So that worked well. Alan Grant, yeah. Then Alan left, and Bert worked there for a while. Then he went off to do computer magazines. Then we had another sub, which was a guy called Simon Gallo, who's the pinball expert, and he was great fun, because he'd come from. I say it was my guy. It's one of the teenage girl magazines and things. So he had a different approach to it and things. We had great fun. It's when all those really crass headlines, straplines started appearing on 2000 AD covers. What does a Helltrek, or what does a dinosaur call a Helltrek? Meals on Wheels. It's that sort of thing. Because what we do is we do whatever we're supposed to be doing during the day, and then at the end of the day, we get the cover roughs out and we kind of come up with straplines for them. So it's that sort of. Sometimes okay, sometimes fun, but it was fun, basically.
Yeah. There is a notable change around 1980, 1981, where, and this is something we'll come on to later, where the tone of 2000 AD seems to go from, still being rebellious and a bit different, but still clearly a comic book, still part of the IPC stable, to much more having its own identity. And it always seemed to be reflected in the covers. They seem much more bullish.
Well, everything was falling away from us at the time, remember, because they didn't like 2000 AD. If they could have closed, they thought 2000 AD would last as long as the science fiction craze. And it's a bit like that thing with guitar groups are out, we're not going to hire the Beatles, famously, or whatever the record label said. And it just kept going, and it became more and more successful. And we had the idea of doing reprinted albums, because we looked at lots of the European anthology titles, because they came in with agents and things. And we were always saying, why don't we do thicker, why don't we do a sort of not slightly adult, but slightly better production values, and do sort of stuff like that, and sell graphic novels, but not called graphic novels then, but collections and things. So even before Titan started doing, we suggested it, but they still just wanted to do 52 comics, an annual and a summer special, and that's what IPC was used to doing with boys' comics. Yeah, and it was, they were still definitely part of the juveniles group, and it was boys' stuff, and it was Battle, Whizzer and Chips. They were all given equal weight. If anything, there was a certain leaning towards Roy the Rovers and Tiger. I can't imagine why that would be. So it was weird, but what happened, I think, is that we kind of just kept doing what we were doing. And also there was an element of, Steve was actually very good at being diplomatic, and we didn't try and sneak things in. That's, nobody did that sort of thing on purpose, because that was inappropriate. Yeah. But we did kind of try and justify everything we did, and when there was trouble and things, they ended up sort of not being so bad about it.
Because there's in the interview you did with Dave Bishop a few years ago, there's the bit with Kevin O'Neill popping
the Inri
on the top of somebody being crucified.
Yeah, it was on the cover, and it was, well, the thing is, I felt bad about that at the time, I suppose, but the thing is, and Kevin knew this, that you can do it, but of course if you put a bit of Catholic symbolism on the front of the cover, somebody's going to cause trouble. He knew that. Kev's a Catholic. They're all, remember how many of them are Irish Catholics that were working there. Yeah. I knew what it was straight away. It was it's that, and it was just it had to go, and it was just unfortunate, but it's just going to cause an immense amount of upset otherwise, because we got criticised for the robot rabbi in Robot Hunter. Yeah. There was complaints about that. Interestingly, nobody complained about the bishop one, but it It was the rabbi that they complained about. Murray Whitehurst had a good go at us. And remember, there was that thing, they were slightly worried because of Action before 2000 there'd been so much trouble with it. They didn't really want to have a repeat of that. But I mean, some of it got silly. I remember there's one where, was it Kid, Sam Slade's assistant, has been inflated with helium when he's floating up. And he goes, "Help me, Sam, I'm going to pop." And the group editor decided that was we were trying to sneak in a reference to farting, and nobody had ever. And we're going, well, hang on, this is. Had we known now what Donald Trump would come up with as words, we know it's all different vocabulary. And it's stuff like that. Or I can remember I think it must just be Robot Hunter you had it in for, because I can remember being told that British heroes were not unshaven and being made to white out stubble of Sam Slade's chin. So if you look at the reprint, you'll probably find he suddenly goes remarkably smooth shaven for an episode, and then he's back to normal after that.
I mean, there was things like censorship of smoke. IPC suddenly decided you couldn't have smoking in any way, shape, or form in that.
Oh yes, but I suppose you could argue he was vaping years ahead of the deal, having a talking cigar.
I mean, as the art editor, I mean, this was your job to bodge this stuff, really, wasn't it?
I did some pretty stuff I'm not proud of.
Right.
I did have to do stuff to artwork. The thing is, if it had to be done, we wouldn't get it out otherwise. No. And I know that people know that was the case and things. Steve had to make the decision if things had to be done, and I would facilitate that being done if we had to take something out or change something. I mean, I know there's a couple of times where people wanted stuff delineating and things, and I think there's a point where you say, well, no, because that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes there was artwork that just wasn't very good that had to be done. There was an artist, very amusingly, Mike Dorey used to come as a fantastic artist, but he'd come in, he hadn't quite finished things, and he would finish a bit, and he would give me instruction on how to finish it for him. And I'd end up, he'd do the figures, and I'd have to put the clothes on, so he'd gone, leaving half of it like that and things. And it was just great. But he also drew on butcher's paper, so you try and keep the ink on it.
Oh, right.
Yeah. No, so you did end up doing some sort of strange things, or you'd finish things that people have forgotten and things. And obviously the other thing is, you'd have to do all the boring things like changing lettering and doing that sort of stuff and things. And of course it was all done manually. There wasn't a computer in the building. I mean, there may have been one in the colour-proofing room that went for the women's magazines, but there was the nearest to a colour computer thing was a thing called I think it was called Quantel Paint Box, and you could go and use it somewhere, but I think it was £1,000 an hour or something. So we didn't have anything like that, and it was all done physically. They had manual typewriters, and everything else was done by hand. And I don't know how many typewriters Steve went through, because he could go through typewriters at quite a rate. 2 desks at least in 6 years.
Wow.
And typewriters. And Alan Grant, they used to have a rubber pad that went under the typewriters to quiet them down. I think we put 2 underneath Alan's, because when he went at it, it was pretty furious. So.
I mean, you do have to properly pound those things when you're in flow, I guess.
Apparently. Apparently. He did, because the thing is, the secretary next door had a IBM golf ball, because that was just coming, which is, have you ever seen a golf ball typewriter? No. Basically, it was the electric typewriter, and basically the font is on a golf ball.
Oh, is that the thing that spins?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And they're faster.
Right.
But I remember one Christmas party, because we had Christmas parties in the office, which is always a mistake, him having a race against the secretary in the next office. She was touch type trained and things. Yeah. He used 2 fingers on each hand. He beat her by a country mile and made less mistakes. But it was noisier, obviously.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask about was the star scans you did of editorial staff and artists and writers.
Yeah.
Because there's ones of Carlos and Brett.
Yeah.
And Tom, obviously, and Richard Burton as well. And I mean, were these just a bit of fun, or was it like, crap, we've got a page we need to fill?
It was both, yeah.
Right.
It was the back covers. So,
yeah.
And the thing is, the back covers you had to have a colour page on the back cover, so you had to have something on it. And there could be ads, and if there wasn't an ad, you'd put something on it and things.
Sure.
And I think it was probably when Simon Geller was there, we started doing it. We were just having fun, because the characters had been, some of them were done, we were doing those, Alan used to write those Tharg stories.
Yeah.
And so it was a natural thing to start featuring some of the robots and things. And in fact, I've got some of this artwork back because Rufus was selling it, and I got some back, and I didn't think I was going to get it, but I got the one of Mickey, I got the one of Brett, and I love the one of Brett because to me the one of Brett looks as much like Brett as anything I can possibly imagine Brett looking like. So it's quite fun and things. And I think somebody did a book about Alan Moore a few years ago, and I actually updated a picture of Alan Moore as a wizard instead of a robot, but it was basically the Alan Moore robot as a wizard. So, yeah, they were just things to do, and I was happy. I would draw anything I was happy to.
I wasn't reading at the time, but they were often sort of picked up in some of the 2000 AD monthlies that I would read, and they are tremendously evocative. Even though obviously they are a friendly portrait of somebody that you know, there's something about the fantasy of
them being robots,
being robots, and I think it's the fact that we still refer to ourselves
as drawers. Yeah, absolutely. With the Mickey one, I know for a fact that whatever it says in Oghams on him, it says Arsenal in Oghams, because I think I got Pat to translate it for me, and that's definitely an Arsenal scarf he's got there.
Yeah.
I've got a picture, because I did that picture of Massimo, and I'll show you this later, but he sent me a picture of himself, done by himself, to show me what he really looks like.
Oh, right. Okay.
Which is cool. So, yeah.
It's just, there's just something about those, they're evocative and friendly.
Yeah, which probably annoys the hell out of people who are on these. No, I don't think so. I think because it was fun. Because it was fun. Because we didn't. The thing is, it was a comic, and the thing is, we didn't take it. It was done seriously and properly, but it didn't take itself too seriously. And I think I liked comics. I mean, my personal preference would be for, although there's been some fantastic full colour artwork over the years and things, I really like the idea of a cheap to buy and relatively cheap to produce black and white comic, which is basically aimed at kids. And if adults like it, that's nice too. But it was still aimed at kids. Remember, it was still aimed at sort of 11-year-olds when we were doing that stuff. As long as I worked on it, it was aimed at 11-year-olds.
Because I mean that's interesting. You were there in that kind of 1980 to when did you leave?
1984.
84.
So I was 78 to 84.
So that's the period of kind of. Shall we call it adolescence? Because Steve McManus had come in and to freshen it up a little bit. It got a little stale over after the initial launch. And 1984 is around about the period when 2000 AD starts becoming more mature in its tone. It starts becoming no longer a kid's comic.
Well, I would say that it was always. Well, I don't know. I'd say that there was always black humour. It was just how far you went with it. Because I still didn't think that 2000 AD should ever be on the top shelf. I always thought it should still be a comic, and I've always thought that's about comics because you lose readers, and you saw it at the 40th anniversary.
Yeah,
you saw a lot of people. There's a big gap between the people that were there, who were the ones in the middle, because they seem to be the same ones that were, they were the kids and things. I mean, I think I said this to Rufus. There used to be this really annoying little ginger kid that used to come to these things, and oh yes, it was Rufus. And we were actually at that convention. I don't know if you saw this at your convention. That there was this punk kid covered in badges.
Oh, right.
And Rufus and he went past each other, and they just looked at each other up and down, nodded approvingly, and moved on. And this kid was about 10.
Right.
Yeah. So, I suppose it did. I mean, the thing is, I don't think that you'd have to, if you were going to be Pat or Kevin, perhaps, you'd have to change what you did, because what you did was what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think of what sort of defines 2000 AD as being different to other comics, look at stuff like Nemesis. It's different to anything you could possibly imagine, and it's Pat and Kevin's vision of what could be in a comic.
I mean, I suppose every comic's got that is originally for children has got to make a decision at some point whether it's going to grow up with the readership it has or rejuvenate itself for a new readership, because it's something I've really noticed with the Phoenix,
I've looked at it occasionally. Yeah, absolutely.
Those guys are great because basically every 2 or 3 years They switch. They grow up to a certain extent, and then they switch back.
Yeah, I know.
And they seem to have the knack of that. Whereas 2000 AD seemed to make a conscious. We're just going to keep going. We're going to grow up with everybody. And
I just think people lost their editorial sense in some ways. That it was not, because there wasn't IPC, because it was moving away from IPC, because there weren't the strict rules that said you've got to try and work with. It's much better creatively, I think, working within some guidelines, because you've got something to push against.
Sure.
You've got something to rebel or to try and go further than. I think that's it. And if everybody's got the same set of rules, then everybody's got to kind of compete. And that was one of the things that I used to really love when I started working, is that somebody would bring in some artwork. So David bring in his art, but these guys all had agents, but they'd still bring in their own artwork. This is the thing.
Yeah.
Brian would come in and he'd just want to see what Dave had just drawn. Mickey would come in, Carlos would be looking at what Mickey, it's like this whole thing that people were always looking to see what everybody else was doing and seeing what they could do next, and they come in. And I know this thing with Judge Dredd, I can remember Brian saying that he just about figure out what Mickey had done with what Judge Dredd looked like.
Yeah.
And Mickey would do something different with it, and he'd have to go, well, how the hell does that attach? And you go, well, it just does, because Mickey's drawn it like that,
Yeah.
And it was that. And in fact, one of your colleagues asked me for an opinion about what Dredd looked like, and I couldn't really. I spent ages thinking about it, and I couldn't remember what it was. I was going to get back to him, and of course, it's the fact that Mickey did things like that. So, with Cursed Earth, Mickey managed to Judge Dredd. It looks like he's got a demented set of Venetian blinds on his shoulder at some point, and the eagle looks like it's losing a few feathers. The thing's falling to pieces, and it's just great. And that was that sort of. And then Brian would have to draw that. He'd have to go, well, how can I do that and make it immaculate?
Well, you're the art editor during this period, and which is, for many people, is the classic period of 2000 AD, the early 80s, where you've got strips like the Heyday Nemesis and things like that. What's it like for you as art editor, seeing this artwork physically come through the door?
You just admire, you just like it.
Yeah.
The thing is, what you do is with that, it just comes in, and if it's all those guys, the sort of consummate professionals, Kevin in particular, because he'd worked editorially, he'd come in with the logo on it, everything ready to go, and it would be exactly the right size. There'd be no problems with it.
Perfect for you then.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was it. And Dave's the same thing. They know what they wanted for everything. Dave lettered it as well. It's that fantastic. And it was easy, but then it left you space to work with these slightly odder artwork that came through. I'm not even going to name anything, because everybody has their fans, and it's not fair. But when you look back, you can see the not quite as cutting edge artwork that used to get there. There'll be things that would cause more of concern, but you had the time, because the good stuff was dealt with it, looked after itself and things.
Yeah.
And you just get on with the rest of it and things. So there was still, even with good artwork, you still had to do some stuff. I remember one of my favourite moments was a Cole Wyatt moment, and I did remind Cole of this recently, so I think I can say this, which is he needed a logo for a Nemesis strip, and we didn't have a print of the logo, and it had come in unusually without the logo on it. And so he was looking for a logo for it, and he found a page of artwork, and he got it, and he ripped the logo off it. And I had to stand there and watch him and go, that's the artwork we're about to send to the printers. The logo off it. He just looked surprised. As a man that didn't believe in using a ruler, you use the edge of a desk with a scalpel, It was very funny. There's nothing. I tell you what, I dug some old artwork out the other day, and there was a few little problems with it, and I thought the only thing I can do is I can repair artwork.
You're also in charge of the subs pile. So when Steve mentioned in his book that when people would send in submissions looking for work, he'd hand them over to you. And he mentions two specific names, which is Alan Davis and Cliff Robinson, who came through that process. Tell us a little bit about how Alan first came out.
Well, with Alan, I've been doing some Marvel stuff and things, but with Alan, it was easy, because Alan really wanted to draw comics with an absolute passion. And it was just, I've just shown you the 2008 on the Tube, where we reenacted Alan Davis coming to work on 2000, right? But Alan's a delight to work with. It was no problem at all. It was straightforward. He knew what he wanted to do, and we just kind of went through a bit more of the technical stuff and things, and the production stuff. Cliff Robinson, I knew his brother Andy Robinson when I was in the Cubs before I went to grammar school. Wow. He didn't go to the same school as me, but He lived in Galston, which was a bit next to Yarmouth. And we were the same age, and we hung out, and I think we did judo together and stuff. And then we both ended up at the same grammar school, which was a pretty brutal affair. And we both decided quite early on we wanted to be long-haired and listen to progressive popular music of sorts. So we stayed friendly for, on and off. But then I think he went off to a commune, I think, at some point, about the fifth form or something. Some of the guys did. Yeah. And I was at moved schools and things. So I'd see Andy once in a blue moon, but I knew him really well. I mean, I knew his family pretty well. Because Cliff was obviously the annoying little brother, so I didn't really know Cliff. And so I knew Andy. And in fact, I think the last time I'd actually had an interaction with Andy, other than just a casual hello in passing and things, was when I was at art college, and it was in the last year I was there. I went into the Life room, and there was Andy standing there bollock naked as the new Life model, right? And I had to point out it was something I hadn't seen since we'd last played football at school in the showers. And so that was the last time I saw him, and now sadly he's sadly dead, which is really sad. But I met Cliff because I went back to my old art college, and he was doing graphics, I think. Yeah, he was doing graphics. And so he came to stay at ours, I think, the first time he came out to London and things. So I said, well, if you want to come up, and so that's how he started working for 2000. So,
one thing that I do remember is that the 4 dark judges, which
I had to fill in some of it, didn't I?
Yeah, Cliff does an episode and you do an episode. Or
he got a bit overwhelmed by it, so I had to fill in some bits of it and things. Obviously, it was not my intention to draw any of that, but I had to sort of just help him out a bit at that point. Well, not help him out, because he was given something. Because he obviously really wanted to draw like Brian, which is in itself is, I mean, having tried to do that and things, it's a very hard thing to do, because Brian's, it's very special what he could do. And Cliff was working hard, but it just got out of hand, and it was really getting to him. So I think Steve said, "Can you help with this?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll." Because obviously you can't ask Brian to do it, because you can't ask Brian to, well, that would have been taken longer, I suppose. So so that's why I did that. I'd also say that in the whole having people to stay, when John Watkiss wanted to work for 2000 AD, he came and stayed at mine as well. And I've got to say this, I've never really forgiven him for the fact he kicked the gravel out of a plant into the rented video recorder, which even now the guys share the flat with goes, "Who was that bloke that destroyed the video?" I said, "He's gone on to great things. I think he's an art director in Hollywood now." So, what a fantastic figure art, what a fantastic anatomy artist he is as well. Yeah. But that's what 2000 used to be like that. If people would stay at people's, and it was kind of quite sort of, it was kind of friendly and things.
But it seemed very much like a network of friends built around a business.
Yeah, that's it exactly. It was that exactly. And we instigated the boys' night outs, which kept on going for years. I mean, there was loads to start off with, and then the core for a long time was Brian, Dave, Mick, Kevin. I think that's it, Brian, Dave, Mick, Kevin, and myself. And we did this for years and years with differing, whereas when there's Americans in the country, the Americans would come on it. So Walt Simonson's certainly been on a few, and I think, I'm trying to think, whoever the Americans were, some of the other guys like Joe Staten and Paul Levitz and some of those guys used to, I think we'd go out to the pub and go for a pizza and things. Right. That's what we used to do on Thursday nights once in a while. In the later days, I think it was just the 4 or 5 of us, and we'd go to Dark They Were, because nobody wanted to go to Forbidden Planet if we could help it, and we'd they'd go out for a pizza and go to a pub. We used to meet in this pub which was on Charing Cross Road, and we didn't know what the pub was called, but it was known as the Freddie Mills. Right. Now, Freddie Mills was a boxer who was famously murdered in, I think, probably the early 60s, late 50s. Yeah. And all I can tell you about Freddie Mills, I didn't know who Freddie Mills was, so I looked it out later, and it was Dave who called the pub Freddie Mills. He was found in a skip in the front of this pub, and it's the one next to Foyle's. It's the one that's set back slightly. It's sort of modern, incongruous. It's not there now, probably. It's down the Crossrail, right? And all I can know about Freddie Mills is when Eamon Andrews had to have This Is Your Life done on him, Freddie Mills was the guy who did it to him, because he was a boxer as well. Right. So we used to go to this, we used to have this sort of old version of London that wasn't like the real place at all. Well, that's also the pub where we'd been on a B&O one night, we're all standing there having a drink, And a girl suddenly realises her handbag has been snatched, so she calls the police. The police get her and say, does anybody see who was standing there? So Dave starts drawing and we all start contributing to her. And that's true.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we all sort of had arms, so I think it looked a bit more like this. Yeah.
Fantastic. But just coming back to the whole subspiles thing, because that's one aspect that having talked to various editors over the years, that's one aspect that they've always struggled to find time to go through the subspile and actually find new talent that they think is worth nurturing, and then having the time to actually nurture it. I mean, how much of your time was taken up with thinking, well, this person's got a little bit of potential?
Well, you could see the difference, because remember that lots of the stuff was coming from kids, but then some was coming from people who are a bit older. I remember one guy just wrote this letter and he gave me a list of all his qualifications and he wanted to work out, but didn't actually send any drawings. I had to write back to him. And so I listed my qualifications, including my 25-yard swimming and my membership with Tufty Club, and said, I'd be very happy if you want to send me some drawings to look at. They were pretty nice. Most of the people that came up, there's a few guys. There's a guy called Steve Kite, I think, had some work out of it. And there's a few other guys that we gave, had bits and pieces of work out of it and things. Because if there was people that were working, if they had an idea of what they were doing, you'd try and encourage them, get them, usually in the annuals or summer specials and things.
Let's talk about the annuals, because certainly that was some of my first contact with 2000 AD was the early 80s annuals. Now, based on what Steve said in his book and what Dave Bishop put Phil Power over that, I mean, these were quite significant money spinners for IPC, weren't they?
Absolutely.
But you had a very, very tight budget.
Yeah, if we're lucky to get a budget, you'd have to look for every bit of artwork that was knocking around and being used. Now, annuals before, and I'm sure I never did this in an interview, annuals before, I know the first Dredd annual that we did, Alan and I did, had been, you get some text story illustrations, you get a long text story, you put it in big type, and you put it onto a sugar paper annual, and you probably add a bit of colour, usually two colour things, so you'd add a bit of colour to the couple of illustrations, and you'd spread it out, and you'd find any old strip that was knocking around, and you'd probably fill up pages like that. Then you'd have a crossword, a word search. I think there's one puzzle section which I actually credited to AA Anagram, which was Anagram, which I'm still slightly pleased with. Obviously, that's really bad, isn't it? You make a joke like that and you're pleased with this many years later. But I don't know that Lucy, my wife, will tell you that she's sat up in a Tottenham flat filling in the black squares in a crossword. Yeah. So, but you do it like that. But what I never said this before, is when I was a kid, annuals were just like this. Yeah. And then they did a Dalek annual, which might probably called the Dalek book, but sadly haven't got it. I don't probably find a copy of it, be bothered to buy it. And it was full of great features, and it had no Doctor Who in it. That was quite good. And it had the Dalek. It was just about the Dalek. Yeah. And it'd have things like a landscape with this is what a planet looks like when the Daleks have left, or a feature about what Daleks were like. So the fact that a Dalek can actually generate enough energy to light a city the size of Birmingham. Right. The fact it can travel at 60 miles an hour on a motorway. But it was all Dalek related. And there was end papers of all the different Dalek vehicles they flew in and things. And so I always wanted to do annuals that you try and be as inventive as you could with the stuff you had. And Alan was the same. So we just try and come up with stupid features, basically. And as you can tell, the ones that got the stupid features in. But of course, then you had the budget for some colour artwork. Yeah. So I think the first things Mickey did, those fantastic colour things, they were sent off to Italy to be printed. So they come with fantastic, and the colour proofs came back, and you just go, this is absolutely immaculate. Yeah. Absolutely lovely. So we always kind of tried to do as best we could with them and things.
Because you can tell when something is a little bit of filler. And certainly as the 80s go on, the polish increases. Yeah. But you get things like, Mick McMahon's How to Draw Judge Dredd, Ian Gibson's How to Draw Judge Dredd. I mean, the sheer number of artists now I speak to who go, that was what made me want to be an artist.
Yeah, how to draw a Dalek. Oh, yeah. This is where this comes from. This is all the things that so the Mickey, I can remember getting Mickey to do that. And apparently somebody's made a statue of that. So where's mine? That's a question. So that was me saying, can you do this, how to draw in stages and things? Yeah. And there was things that I really like, and there's things I'm sure I must have done it at some point. which is, or they did it. What I always want to do is things like there's those features that used to be in Marvel Comics. So this is the Baxter building. So it's a cutaway where the Fantastic Four lived and things, those sort of things. And there's a thing about, and I know it's reprinted in the British reprints, so I had it originally in colour, Iron Man putting on his armour, right? So he puts on the gauntlets, and there are little electromagnets that slide the sleeves up to the shoulder bits and things.
Yeah.
And it's stuff like that. And I always thought, that's the stuff you want to do with Judge Dredd. And if you remember, if you've ever seen the film Electroglide in Blue, right, which is about an American motorcycle cop, which is quite appropriate for Judge Dredd. It starts off with, you don't see the guy, but you see him putting on his American motorcycle gear. So you see him clip on the thing, put the gun on, put the boots. You know, it's like all the gear goes on and things. And it's those sort of things that would make perfect Judge Dredd things, if anybody could figure out how Mickey had got the things to go on in the first place, obviously. So it was just trying to be inventive with it. And the budget would cover some cheap colour artwork. But of course the artists fancied doing some colour stuff because you very rarely got to do it. So, you know, Mickey would mix up a couple of buckets of paint. I think he was sharing a studio with Dave Gibbons at the time. And Dave would say, "What you got in the bucket there?" And he said, "I was doing a Judge Dredd angle then, are you, Mickey?" And
I mean,
we just didn't get paid. Well, it was. Well, the budget didn't involve Alan and I getting paid to be sitting up the King's Reach Tower till 11 o'clock at night doing it. I think was the deal.
Then, I mean, that was going to be my next question. Then why? Why sink that sheer amount of money into something that, as far as the company was concerned, was throwaway?
Well, they didn't put that much money into it, if you think about it, because they were paying for the artwork, but we were using a lot of it. They were paying for some good bits of artwork. The rest of it was just put together. So you'd say the annual would be, you'd have 2 colour stories, you'd have maybe another strip or something, but the rest of it would be stuff that wasn't used. So Casanova's stuff was used in an annual originally we had knocking around. That had been done for something, it had been bought, and then it was never used for whatever reason. That was resized and redone. So the annual it was like you had some good bits of it and you had to make the rest sort of match the good bits, so you didn't go through the boring bit. Okay. But if you remember what the sales figures of 2000 AD were? They were about 100,000 a week. And you're going to sell a fair number of annuals to the people that want that, because they started selling them they were put together in the summer for the next Christmas. So they're always a year behind and things. And every kid got an annual. Every kid still gets an annual, I presume, except now it's probably a Take That annual or whatever. I think that's probably changed the thing. But annuals were annuals. Everybody had them. That's why you'll see so many of them in jumble sales, in junk shops and things, because, and if that was your comic, you would have the annual for that.
Was it a degree of kind of pride, I guess, that you know, yes, we've got no money for this, but we still wanted to match the quality of the weekly?
No, I think what it was, and the other thing is Alan would write something and I'd draw it, we'd pay ourselves a little bit. We were very good rates.
There we go, No,
because you'd be paying, you're doing it for 50 quid a page or so, whatever, half the normal rate. But it was the only way to get anything out of it. And so we just, it's like somehow we've got to get something for doing it. We just do it because it's also part of your job. I think actually we came to the conclusion eventually there was a budget for it. It was just that it was a bit like something to do with The Sopranos, that people at the top have their cut, people below them have their cut. By the time the people who are actually doing it, there's no cut left. You're still going to pay the artists that do some of it something because their agents want their cut. It's that. I know there's an element of that, and I know that there were occasions on which senior executives of the juvenile group and things did put themselves down to do the annuals. So one particularly high-powered person used to do the Look and Learn annual, famously had the wrong flags on the top of Everest, and another one was pulped because they had the labelling wrong on which were poisonous fungi and which ones were not. Okay, and they were the end papers, so that one had to go as well.
Wow.
So these things did happen. I know these could be stories that Kevin told me from my previous, before I started, they're apocryphal, but maybe not.
And in terms of your day-to-day work on 2000 AD, I mean, it's actually probably one of the most varied jobs of 2000 AD at the time, because you're touching on so many aspects. You're dealing with new artists, you're bodging, putting copy lines, etc., on stuff. You're dealing with kind of pre-production stuff. what was your feeling about it at the time? Was it just a lot of fun? Was it hard work? Was it rewarding?
Yeah, it was great. It was just a great job. I mean, I knew I was going to go freelance eventually. So if you're going to have a job, it was like the best job I could possibly imagine having. When I got to be the art editor, it was like a weird thing. We moved office sites. So we had an office that was a corner of the King's Reach Tower. And we had to move office. But we moved sort of half an office. Because Gil Page wanted a bigger office, and he wanted the corner office and a bigger corner office. Yeah. I didn't understand the corner office thing until I was a lot older, but apparently corner offices are the thing you want. Anyway, so Gil wanted that. So we moved half an office along. So there was then a bit in between. It was like a sort of block of IPC King's Reach Tower window sort of block thing between us. Yeah. So we had a sort of separate thing. So just get on with it and things. Steve would be seeing people coming in and things. Steve would tend to deal with people bringing stuff in and the agents and things. I'd just sit there and get on with it. There was a couple of assistants to start off with, and then I had this fantastic assistant, Paul Leatherland, who basically was fantastic because he'd just do things like I wanted them done. So I was quite sort of fussy about stuff, and Paul would do it. He'd just sit there, and you'd end up having to change detail on an imprint, which is in 4-point type, and you'd end up doing with a scalpel and sort of doing that stuff and things. And he was just really good at it. He was excellent. And there's those things, because you're doing camera-ready artwork, there's all that thing, anything with an edge has got to be painted around it with processed white and things, so you don't get the shadow and things. Stuff like that. So the actual production, given the limitations of it, it was done as, we produced artwork as well as we could do it.
One thing I want to ask about, and I've got Rufus sent us these, was the cover roughs that you did.
Oh, yeah.
For that were sent to artists. Yeah. And now, I'd seen in Thrill Power Overload before that these had been mentioned, but I hadn't realised just how close to the original artwork your roughs were. I mean, these were your designs.
Well, Rufus has got them all. So if you ever want to see any of them, you can ask him. He'll let you see them. He was trying to do something with them. Yeah, no, they were absolutely and they just do. Yeah, exactly. That was the thing. They'd do it if they did. I mean, they'd object like hell because they go, "What do you know?" And I remember Mickey on that one. And this is like that artwork, right?
So this is the 85 2000 AD.
I would say the thing as well. But the thing like that is because we planned, we knew what. The nice thing about manual is hardly anything to go on it. Okay.
Yeah.
If you tell them where the logo is, you can see Mickey just allowed exactly what I'd done. He did it exactly right. Yeah. But as he said, he'd never drawn Rogue Trooper before, so I remember moaning about that. But I think in the end it worked beautifully. Yeah. But bearing in mind that is Pantone sheeting.
Oh, really?
It had to be stuck out. It was awful. There was no way of, you couldn't do it.
So that's cutting it out.
That's cut out. Yeah, absolutely. That is actually cut. That is Pantone.
Wow.
And so I think these are too. I'm pretty certain these were as well. They're right actually. Yeah, they're all pretty much as they. Yeah, I think a lot of them are still black and white. I think I just, I did that. I really liked doing that. It's good fun because what we could do is, if we knew what was going on the cover, and that you could trust the people to do exactly what you'd asked for, you didn't have to worry about the cover. When the cover came in, it would just be strapline and logo on it, and it's done because you haven't got to. You'd kind of half thought it already. And what would happen is Steve would give me part of the covers he wanted for the next, say, 4 or 6 issues. Yeah. And while I had time to do it, when I wasn't doing anything else, I'd knock out some cover roughs and he'd just get them off to the artists and things.
Because I mean, these are iconic covers. I mean, we've got the 85 annual here. We've got the Starborn thing Dredd cover that Mick did. I mean, it's obviously it's Mick's work, but you're providing them. It's obviously it's not like the tail wagging the dog or anything like that. But I don't think most people would ever appreciate just how much involvement.
Well, if you think about this, okay, so you've got the thing like the Sky Chariots one, right? Yeah. Okay, I know what the Sky Chariot's going to look like. I know it's got to fit in that space and things. Yeah. Now, I can get Mickey to do a lovely picture of a Sky Chariot's fitting in and things, but I'm also aware that we might have to put something else on it, we might have to do that, so it was easier to do it like that. And of course, it was just fun doing it, and I was like, I'm sure there's a degree of resentment. In fact, there are a couple with a little bit of back and forth with Mr. Gibbons on the subject. But hey, it's one of the few things where I think it's.
Well, it's this note on the Judge Dredd annual from 1985. Dear Carlos, Here is the colour rough for the 85 JD annual cover. I leave it to you to improve, capital letters underlined, position/pose of figures. It is intended to give you the, quote, feel of the cover, not, capital letters underlined, to tie you down completely. So you kind of slightly shoving the pill a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, it was just to say, because I knew Carlos as a much better artist than I was, but the thing is, I knew what we needed to have on the cover. And that is the thing. And it was,
Were these something that were being done before you?
No. I think we started doing that. I think I probably started doing that. Probably did it roughly when Cole was still there, because Cole would let me do things like that. So he'd just say, "Do you want to do this?" Or, it's that sort of. I mean, because I liked it. Yeah. I mean, remember, I liked comics still, and Alan had grown up on Marvel, and he loved comics too. And we also read loads of science fiction. Alan and I went through. I mean, I've never read science fiction since, I think, but we go through 2 or 3 books a week, on the tube, whatever. And you'd come up with something, you'd be reading Philip Dick, and you'd come up with something that would suggest something, you just try it and things. Obviously, the thing is with letterpress and things, you get a limit on what you can actually do.
Yeah.
And it's really nice when you can do, even with line stuff and things, it's really nice when you get a really nice sharp colour on it and things. And that's sort of, you just force the issue with covers and things, you just kind of see what you can do that's.
I mean, it's interesting that there was that degree of art direction, because nowadays, people supply Matt with a handful of roughs and he goes, "I love that one," as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, but think about that. You see, it's gone like that. So basically, the artist probably doesn't mind it. But in those days, remember, it was a job. We were doing things to pay mortgages and things. It's not fair to have said to, say, Dave, "Give me 6 rough ideas and I'll choose one," because that's just vaguely insulting anyway. But what a waste of his time. Yeah. Much better to give a rough he doesn't like and he can do a better version of. Because the thing is, it shouldn't be down to that. It's a bit like they changed this idea, and they did start doing this instead of. I can remember Alan Grant at the time saying this. At one point, if a writer was going to write a new story, this is probably more American, but I think it's probably the same with things like Judge Anderson. He'd be asked, he'd have a get together with the editor. They'd have a chat about it, they'd discuss storylines and things, and the writer would go away, he'd do a draft, he'd send it, and that would be it, and they'd go ahead with it. You wouldn't have to come up with proposals for it first, and I'll choose between these. Because, of course, there have been, not, I hasten to say, in 2000 AD, but I've heard of instances where there are certain rather unscrupulous editors that have basically gone through ideas from people and just given it to their favourite writer and said, "Oh, we got this, can you change it a bit?" So they can't tell, So I think it was probably better to do it like this. And of course, it's a matter of time. It was a weekly comic, remember, so anything extra that people did had to be fitted in with drawing 5, 6, 7 pages of artwork anyway. So So
what were your favourites at the time? What were the strips that really stood out? I mean, you've already mentioned Nemesis.
I liked all of them. I liked. There's nothing. I think I could find something to be said for most things, but if I could choose the things I didn't like the most, and it's not because of the artwork or anything, it was just I didn't really like sports stories.
Right.
We'd all seen Rollerball, and I think that was enough. I was at art college with one of the girls that was one of the extras in Rollerball, so it's like I had to have enough of this. The Harlem Heroes on television was funny. Harlem Globetrotters. Globetrotters on television was funny. The Harlem Heroes, Artie Gruber was okay, but the rest of it did start wearing a little bit thin, didn't it? But I suppose it was still a groundbreaking in its way. But I mean, you could take anything. You could take. I know which of my favourite stories by the people that did them. So, with say Kevin and Mickey, I really liked when they did working together on Roadbusters, and they were sort of riffing off each other and things. There was some wonderful stuff, and Dave also doing stuff on that. With Dave, Rogue Trooper, I always think was just those first few episodes of Rogue Trooper. I kept photocopies in the office, and when somebody came in, they wanted to know about storytelling, and you go, don't try and draw like Brian, try and learn to tell a story like Dave. And it was that, you could draw like Dave. If you draw like Dave, it'd be marvellous as well. But it was this thing about storytelling. I'd use that as an illustration of what, not how to do it, but the sort of thing you should be looking for, the storytelling, not the sort of finish and things.
And how much influence did you have on which artists drew a series? Because I know Steve makes reference to the fact you weren't all that keen on Brian Talbot taking over on Nemesis for the Gothic Empire.
Well, I just think that's why I like Brian. Brian's I got extremely well with Brian, and But I just thought he should be doing something. If Brian had a sort of organic look, and I think basically Kevin's spikiness was what really drove Nemesis. That's that look and things. And I probably didn't think it was probably the best thing. But then you can have an opinion. It doesn't really matter. That's that's the way it works.
But it was still the editor who was making the decision.
Oh yeah, Steve had that say and things. But you could sway him and things. And anybody that said that I got to not send any artwork, unless the artwork was needed to be changed drastically, which is very, very rare, we would never send it back to be done. So anybody that suggests that there'd been a story of some sort where I kept on sending it back to the artist, they would I tell you, Steve would never have let me do that. I promise you. Yeah. So I don't think we did it like that. I think I could have opinions about it, and I think they were valid. But I mean, I think with something like Nemesis and Brian doing it, if Pat liked that, Pat, it was his story, and he liked it. If Kevin was okay with it, because the thing is that there was a bit of disappointment with some of the artists that left, and they left because they wanted a little bit. I think they just wanted to be treated slightly better by the company. They wanted a little bit more money and a little bit more respect for what they were doing when it came to people were making a fortune. I know there's people that have made a fortune and in some cases lost a fortune off the reprint back of people that were putting all this effort into it.
I mean that was a real bone of contention, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
When those reprints started.
Well, particularly as the person that reprinted them said when he started doing that, if you guys help me out, I'll make sure you always do okay out of it. Right. And in fact, I actually did the stationery for the first iteration of that company for him, which I'm pretty sure I didn't get paid for as well. So, and I think that was a bad deal, because the thing is, you can't say that you weren't making any money out of it when you suddenly build an empire based on the 2000 AD sort of blood, sweat and tears. Because the guys were doing it out of passion, and they were seeing their stuff just reprinted and not really getting. If anything was paid for, it was hardly anything. There was the argument, IPC wants it all. That wasn't the case at all. Yeah.
I mean, one other issue towards the end of your time in 2000 AD was returned artwork.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, how was that? Did that come about purely because the artists were starting to say, "Well, actually, we'd quite like our stuff back"?
No, people had wanted their artwork back for ages. There wasn't a market for it, but it was slight people getting the suggestion there was. But they put so much effort in, they wanted to see them having it, not somebody else having it. Particularly if it's being reprinted, they obviously would never get the rights to the image, but they would get the rights to the physical image. And remember, the NUJ deal on that, if you're a cartoonist, was the artwork physically belongs to you. And actually, European copyright law says artwork that you produce as an artist, the physical artwork belongs to you. And you still have the right to have that back. It's the same for photographers. What they used to do is the photographer actually owned the negatives. So IPC used to supply the photographers for the photo strips and things with the film. It's that you can see how that would work. But the issue was with the artwork back, that people would like their artwork back, but IPC were not going to give it them back because they Syndication International reprinted all this stuff abroad. Oh, well, we might not have copies of it. They had copies of it. Just didn't want anybody to get anything, it was that sort of, there was an element of that. And I think because I kind of got on okay with pretty much most of the editorial people, I've seen the managers and things, I've been there for 6 years, and I was nothing if not helpful when somebody got, somebody would, it was quite nice because somebody would be doing something and they would say, can you come and help with this because it's gone wrong or whatever. And it was kind of, so when I started banging on about the return of artwork, eventually they said, it was John Sanders said, okay, they have the artwork back, but they're going to have to provide a film copy of it. Huh. And it'll cost, I can't remember, £1 each or whatever, for Syndication International, because we're not sure we've kept them all, because they were so cursed. They'd send them off to Italy and they wouldn't come back. And it was, and Syndication International was, so I think it had been owned, I'm not sure. It was probably something that was owned by the Mirror, and when the Mirror owned the comic, I can't. There was some tenuous link and things, but they had a say in what went on and things. And so I got them to agree that if people were willing to pay a small fee for each page of artwork, I would get the artwork out of the art library. But there was this thing on Southwark Street, and it was just cavernous. It was just this fantastic. It's the one you hear about. It's the Raiders Lost Ark. It's
Area 51 kind of
the
thing.
whole of the end bit of it was little packets like this of stuff like that. Wall picture library artwork, little tiny solid little packets, and it was a wall of it by people like Hugo Pratt as well as Gino Dante. It's like really good stuff there. And they said they'd do it. So I said to all the artists, what do you want? The agents, but obviously the guys that when our B&Os were obviously had it firsthand where the agents were told. If you make a list of the artwork you want back, I will try and find it. And even if Landau's had it for reprinting, I'll see if I can get it back. And I will get it, we'll figure out what's there. But you'll have to pay, and I'll have to send it off to have a copy of it, proper, again, it'll have to go and be shot for a film negative, like we did for the pages anyway. So it'd have to go, we'd have to come back, and we'd have to have page, same size negative. I'm saying negative, it might have been film positive, I can't remember which way it was. And they would be, IPC could have those, I'd file them so they could keep them, and then there wouldn't be trouble with it. You'd have to pay for them, we'd have to arrange this through the payments thing. And Mick did most of his stuff, Dave did a lot of his stuff, Kev did lots of his stuff. We found, other people said, we got this, they'd like this, and they probably had some, probably Brendan had some. People asked for the stuff back they wanted, and they sort of stuffed up the cash for it and things, which I didn't sort of take the money, but they had to sort it out themselves. Yeah. And sadly, Brian didn't quite get around to doing a lot of his, and so he missed out on a lot of it. But there was a lot of resentment about the fact people had to pay for something that...
I'm not surprised.
Well, but if you think about it, nobody had ever had any artwork back in the history of publishing.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like we'd all been getting our artwork back before that in 2008. There was a thing the size of, as I've said, of IKEA full of artwork that had never been returned. And if people wanted it back for the first time, I think if you're Brian, it's £1 for a page of artwork. Although it's a bit annoying, have the artwork back first and then complain about it later. Mm. And it was sad because I really wanted to find as much of this stuff as possible. And because it was going off to be tight and reprinted and things, it was more important than ever to try and nail down which pages came back and things. Yeah. So we found a lot of it, and then I left. And that was it. I knew there was a finite time for doing it. It wasn't done before I left. Because I left, and then Maxwell had bought the company, they moved offices, they changed the whole thing, they moved the art library, they destroyed a lot of stuff, and what they didn't destroy, they took down to somewhere in Vauxhall, and it was sharing a warehouse with somebody that stored toilet paper at the time. So it all went into the hands of some dodgy bloke. I did discover quite recently that the reason that there was so much Massimo's Bolognelli's artwork knocking around is because he couldn't afford to have it sent back to Italy, which I think is really very, very sad. But I mean, that's just one of those things. And Carlos had nowadays, in the end, people got their artwork back without paying for it. Because if you think about it, if you were Carlos, you would be bankrupt trying to buy back all your artwork. Or even, Massimo had a lot. Yeah. But that was why that was the thing with the artwork. It was not it wasn't a IPC ripping people off. It was, this is the only way you're going to get it because they feel insecure about giving your artwork to you.
It's kind of the impression that you get of IPC was, again, as we've already discussed, is a lack of understanding of the value of what they had.
I don't think they were interested, at least what they liked, and I don't think Barry, as the group editor, would object to this. He really cared about football comics. Right. He didn't care about 2000 AD. They didn't like 2000 AD, and it's hilariously funny that after all these years, it's the only one that's still left. and it's been like that for a few years.
Yeah.
Okay, it'd be really cool if it was still selling 100,000 a week. I'm sure you're...
We'd be very happy,
it's everything else had fallen apart. I thought, because I used to do bits and pieces around, as I was saying, around IPC, that I was actually asked, I think it was it Doug Church, he said, look, Tiger's closing next issue. Do you want to do the cover for it? And I went, the last issue of Tiger. I was born to do this. What do you want? He said, it's a kid on a BMX bike for some promotional thing. I said, I don't care. I mean, it's hard, it's big ellipses, but I'll do it. And I did it. And then they got it wrong. It ran for another issue, so I did the penultimate one. And I just was so disappointed. I was so disappointed. No, but those other guys, 2000 AD is one thing, but the other guys were nice. I mean, Dave Hunt on Egos was fantastic. When I got blacklisted for arguing about Maxwell and reprints and money and stuff and stupid things, Dave Hunt just said, you can't work 2000, you can come work for Eagle. So I worked for Eagle for about 2 years.
Let's talk about that, because that was kicked off by, I think, some comments by Alan Moore in Time Out magazine. About the lack of money from the creators receive from reprints, and you wrote.
Well, he wrote.
Yeah.
He said, Well, I'm not going to try and do this. You come from Northampton, you can do the accent. Alan Moore said, and absolutely quite clearly right, he said something along the lines of, oh, well, creative people in comics aren't going to be content with what was it? Something about the final slice of cake. It was
right.
Cake.
Yeah.
And I think I wrote a letter just went, "Oh, really late over fucking crumbs," or something along those lines. I said it was Maxwell and Thatcher I mentioned in the thing.
Right.
They took Maxwell out of the letter, but left Thatcher in, and people complained to John Sanders, and he said I couldn't work for IPC anymore. And this is when I'd gone freelance. The most stupid thing of all. Alan Grant also caused a fuss. There was an issue about Robert Maxwell took over the company. We were supposed to get holiday pay because that was part of our contract.
Yeah.
And he decided we weren't getting our holiday pay from the previous year and things. There was other issues going on, and I just thought I'd never write a letter to a magazine again ever in my life and things. But I think it was Neil Gaiman that did the piece in Time Out.
Right.
I'm pretty sure he was working for Time Out. You'd have to check that. But
Yeah.
I think that's So I figured that he still owes me half a career, which I'm sure he can well afford to. They did this in a well-meaning way. This was, because they were trying to make a point quite reasonably. They weren't trying to get me into trouble, but they could have left the Maxwell in it.
I mean, that suggested, because you've gone freelance by this point, that suggests a certain degree of
stupidity?
No, I wasn't going to use that word. Anger was the word I was going to use.
No, it was irritation. I think it was a bit fed up with the whole thing. It was just a bit. It was a bit stupid. I shouldn't have done that. Yeah. I suppose on reflection, I should have done it more subtly. I was just being a smart ass, basically. And it was a fair point. I thought Alan had made a very, very fair point. Yeah. And I can usually remember what the quote is, and it was something. He said something about they aren't going to be content with just having the crumbs from the publisher's table. Right. And my comment was further to that about the crumbs and things. They weren't even like, I might have been eating shit, but I can't remember. I think it's one. I think it might be one of those things. Well, Time Out was supposed to be pretty radical at the time, wasn't it? I did do something for City Limits. I did do a picture of Downing Street as an estate agent's office. Right. I think later, so I'd also done a cover for Marxism Today, so I think probably I was feeling a bit sort of bolshy at the time. So it was a bit foolish. So Alan and I both got blacklisted. He was unblacklisted about a day later because he was working with John. Right. And so he didn't stay blacklisted, but he's good because he kept the attitude, but he didn't have this sort of financial penalty. Yeah. Unfortunately, Steve and Bert decided it probably best if I didn't work for 2000 because John Sanders had said so. I think that's pretty much. I think this is how it went. Yeah. I can't be sure. Steve apologised to me for something at the convention we went to, so I'm assuming that's what he was apologising to. I've long since forgotten what it was that was annoying anyway. So, and so basically, I ended up doing lots of KP crisp packets, which I was doing anyway. So I had lots of freelance work anyway. Ian Rimmer very kindly had left. IPC and he'd gone to work for Marvel UK and he gave me work straight away. Right. And so it was just, there was that thing, but it was that sort of, it was probably a foolish thing because all I wanted to really do was work for 2000 AD and that was never going to happen because I annoyed John Sanders. It's just what you know in hindsight. Alan and I often have a joke about this and he reckons he's still blacklisted and I'm going, you're never as blacklisted as I was, mate. He said he's blacklisted now, of course, but yeah.
Now, one thing I did want to ask about is because Steve makes mention of it in his book is Alan Grant left to go freelance and Richard Burton came in. He came in and then went away. And
Bert came in for a while, but he was a comics fan, which was probably a mistake.
Okay. So. You didn't get on, did you?
Well, I've been used to working with Alan Grant, where there was quite a driven. I think Richard probably had he'd done a fanzine and things, and I think when you've got a weekly comic to do, you've got to get into a more professional attitude to subbing. And I think it was a bit slower, but you had to get it done. So yes, we probably didn't appreciate. I didn't appreciate his more relaxed attitude to it. I mean, lots of the time we did, but sometimes it got frustrating because you still had to get the issue out and things, so things had to be done. Yeah. Whereas Alan's attitude towards it, do the boring shit first, and then you can do the fun things afterwards or whatever, but it has to be done. And so when you make it slow on a weekly comic, it does get a little bit bit tricky because you're waiting for stuff and you're waiting for copy, and you've just got to do it really in the end.
Is that where the caricature Bert is kind of?
I think
slightly forgetful.
Well, I think actually Alan and John had written that into a Tharg story already. I think Bert he'd already got his in a. But I think it was pretty much a lot of people's experience of it and things. Right. But then he went off and did a computer magazine with Tony Tyler, who was the one-time NME editor. And they went off and did this thing called Big K. And it was great because Doug Churchard edited that, so I got to do lots of computer game stuff.
Right.
Which I didn't like computer games, so I liked doing the covers of them and magazines and things. So that was what Bert done, and he didn't come back while I was still there. I think he came back when I left. He then got to be the editor, and his great friend Alan Mackenzie got to be his assistant, or vice versa. I can't remember how this was. It was after I left, pretty much. Anyway, I think I was still doing odd bits. I still did odd bits of work and things. I didn't really work with him very much. But Simon Geller started then. Yeah. And Simon Geller, as I said, that you go from one really hot sub like Alan, very creative. You get a sort of Bert slows things down a bit in the middle, and then Simon Geller comes along, and it's all sort of hot again. And we had, it was like we had great fun. And there was things when Simon was there, it's when Carl and Suggs did their record, and so we'd get to go and do stuff like that, go and see performances of that, and you go and do this, and you go do that, pool and pinball. So it's good. But you did, because he was a trained journalist and things. The only thing I'd say about Simon is he went to work on GQ or something like that afterwards. And all I'd say is he's obviously lied about his age, because he used to be older than me, but apparently he's younger than me now. So
1984. Yeah. You left Editorial 2000 AD.
Yeah.
Now you've already mentioned that you've been intending to go freelance. Was there something that finally kind of nudged you over the edge?
No, it wasn't like that at all. I wanted to go freelance because I wanted to do some more drawing and stuff, and just get on with it and things. So I just wanted to sort of have the challenge today. I just fancy doing it because you got to do all sorts of things. I'd done quite a lot of. Somebody had offered me a job as well. I was offered a job. I did lots of stuff for KP, for an agency, doing that, and the guy offered me a job as an art director. So I was leaving anyway, and I said, "But you're out in High Wycombe, and I've still got to finish my notice or whatever." He said, "Well, I'll start paying for your driving lessons." And I said to him, "Okay, if I start driving lessons, how long do you think before I can have an E-type jacket?" And he said, "A year." And I said, "No, I want to draw comics." And even now, it's one of those things you think, is that the sensible? I thought, no, I'll be on my third wife and second liver by now if I've gone into done that. So I went freelance, and I first of all did a bit for 2000. I did stuff for Eagle, which was nice working for Dave. And I worked for Marvel UK, and I did, as I said, advertising. I did also anything that was going. I just like being freelancer. You just do any job. And it used to be, there was this thing, and I think it's not quite the same. You'd be at a party and somebody would say, "Oh, do you fancy doing such and such?" Or we used to play, we had a softball team. Yeah. That's an AD softball team. Yeah. And you'd be playing, and I just say at this point, the only person who could actually play softball properly to start off with was John, because he played Little League baseball when he was a child. So he was actually the only one that could do it properly. So, we all came to it eventually. Yeah. So you just do I just do anything. I mean, I've been clearing out old stuff and things, and just draw anything that was going really.
Because after you'd left, you did Bad City Blue for
that was, they gave me that as I went. Yes,
as a parting gift, or just
I truthfully think that it was something they were trying to sell to DC that DC didn't want. I suspect that's probably what it was.
I remember reading Bad City Blue. It struck me very much as a kind of very solid kind of dystopian sci-fi. So not in the kind of the vein of something like Nemesis, but more in your kind of what am I thinking of? A stainless steel rat mixed with a little bit of kind of Escape from New York.
That's probably Escape from. It was something like that, wasn't it? It was just a one-off thing. It was half an idea they had. I remember John and Alan at that point. I mean, I was working for, I think I just said Eagle, but John and Alan, writing under assumed names, were writing half of the comics being produced in the country. They wrote more comics than Jimmy Page played on records in the 60s, for God's sake. I mean, F. Martin Candor. Well, Martin's was this John's local newsagent. Candor was the local garage, and F because it sounded good with Martin Candor. You know, they wrote all this. They were writing 2000, and they were writing Scream, I suppose, and Eagle stuff and all sorts. I don't know, Scream, Eagle, definitely.
Yeah.
So for a science fiction one-off like Bad City Blue, that was that.
I mean, what was your feeling about it? Because you had you done any sort of major sequentials like that previously?
No, just one-offs and things.
Okay.
What I really wanted to do was actually spend the next few years just drawing things and trying to get better at it. So I did do that for Eagle a bit. Because there's lots of things, I look at the stuff I did and some of it's pretty, it's pretty awful. And I that's why I don't look at it very often. But you can only get better, so it's that thing. But the thing is, what you need to do is to draw all the time to do it. And I suppose I used to end up doing all sorts of things. I did stuff. I did some strips for Transformers and for Action Force for Marvel. And in fact, I think we did that. I did that in advertising up to we did the Bogeyman,
right,
which is in 89, I think 88 and 89. So
I mean, we'll come on to the Bogeyman in a minute because you did odd episodes of Dredd.
Just one-offs and things.
You did. Obviously, we talked about the four dark judges.
I think I might have mentioned to the editor that a suggestion that, as he said, the first thing he ever liked was Monsteroso. That if he ever wanted to do the return of Monsteroso, I'm the man, and I've got the artwork, and I might even bribe him with it if he wants it.
With those sort of one-off Dredds, was it? I'm interested in how you came to drawing them. Was it something that you requested? Was it Steve saying, "Oh, do you want to do a
just
Dredd?"
that. If I want some work or something, I say I want some work, and John and I say, "Oh, right, well, next time it'll be that or whatever." When there's usually between multi-part stories and things, right, I get to do odd ones and things. But they're always. I'm trying to think which ones. There was Pinboing Replay. There was Monsteroso, there was one with the bloke that looks like Russell Grant. There's with a demon out of a pavement or something with a colour spread or something, I can't remember. I know the spread's knocking around. These are very forgettable things. But I would just try to draw anything that was going, truthfully.
Right.
I fancy drawing pretty much whatever's available and things.
Because I find it interesting that like I said earlier, that kind of crossover between commercial and sequential comic art. Because you're also doing things like, he stood behind us, the big life-size standee.
I was on staff that I had to take a day off to do it.
Really?
Yeah, I was no, because the publicity department had commissioned this thing, and it's a weird thing because if you look, it's distorted because it had to be changed because it had to fit in a size of two pieces of the board they could make it out of.
Oh, right.
But it had to be, so we had to kind of juggle it and things. And Brian was going to do it, but Brian was busy doing something else. And we ran out of time, basically, and Steve said, we're really fucked because you've done the rough of this and we've got to have it in 2 days' time.
Yeah.
And Brian's agent said, Brian's too busy. So Steve said, can you do it? And I said, yeah, okay, you have to give me a day off, though. And of course, he didn't give me a day off. He said, you can have a day holiday. And I don't think they ever took the day off me for that, actually, in all fairness. So I just took it home and did it on the kitchen table. Yeah. So I think the artwork for it's that sort of size.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So actually about kind of half...
about third size. Yeah. So it's a good piece of artwork and things.
Because it's interesting because what's it called? Cartoon Museum's 40 years of 2000 AD, they had
one of those,
yeah. Sort of facing you as soon as you came in. It's kind of instantly recognisable. Lots of people. It's interesting. Were you purposefully trying to mimic Brian's
I was trying to do it as close as I could to a specific Brian picture because they wanted Brian to do it. The Brian picture was a black and white that we'd use as a poster or something, and I had to actually just copy it as closely as I could copy it,
right.
Which it's not quite as, there's not the finesse there and things, but I think most of it's pretty much the lines. It was enough like a Brian thing, because that was the idea. All I was trying to do was just make it look like Brian had done it enough that people would be happy with it for the, it's got that slot in the middle, which is where the comics went. Do you know that's what it was? This is what it is. Really? Yeah, that's what it is. It's a display thing to go.
Yes, that.
So you slot them into his belly.
The comics went in like that. That was the idea of it.
Is that stupid? Do you know, I just got the artwork back from Rufus. Rufus borrowed it years ago for an exhibition in Belgium, Belgium, I think. And I only got it back, and I've been trying to get that artwork back off him for years and years. And he ended up living it in the comic shop. What's the comic shop near Longacre? The one at the end of Longacre, it's... I can't remember what it is. Eventually, the artwork, Rufus goes to Germany, leaves my artwork there, nobody can find it.
Right, okay.
Eventually, I got it all back.
Right.
I think Gary got pissed off at me because Gary knew where it was, but unfortunately, he didn't give me the clue, which is it's got some orange parcel tape on it. Had he told me that? Yeah, so that was just, I took a day off and did it, possibly.
Because one thing I did always love with those little the stand-up things, cut out and stand them up of Johnny Alpha and Slane and
dressing up dollies as they got called. That was just to try and get something different out of out of a newsprint comic, basically. Yeah.
Because it sort of reminds me of what you were talking about earlier with the annuals, where you're taking a cue from...
It was a dead page and try and do something with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the model of it, of Rogue Trooper one I really like, because he had a 5-string banjo on his back as well, which looked really good on that. And I can remember we used to do this. We'd line them all up along the thing and fire rubber bands on them. It was just to try and get something else out of it. Enough kids like them. And of course, the ones that really liked it had to buy 2 copies, didn't they?
Yeah.
Because they'd cut one of them up.
A kind of a collector's market kind of, there are people now buy one to bag and one to read.
People I know are quite abusive, but I think it's once you've done it, and that's the thing, isn't it? You can't take it back once they've seen it. It's that.
Because something that really came in this period was the wraparound covers.
Yeah.
And I think Steve mentioned that was actually you working out the printing presses could now do this.
Yeah, no, because I figured out that if they could do a centre spread, they could do a wraparound cover, because there's no reason, because it's the same, and because the way the signature worked, it was done with, and we had to have 2, obviously the colour stuff back and front, the spread and the thing is done the same, so there's no reason why I couldn't wrap around.
Right. Because there's some absolute crackers.
It's something brilliant. I love that Prime one, actually. That's one of my favourites.
Which one?
Red going across it. There's firing from City Block.
That's the one where he's kind of stood.
That's it.
Kind of dead centre, but firing onto the back cover kind of thing.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to see the cover up of that one? That's identical. It's good fun when you could do that, because it just made it different if you did a wraparound. And it just made it sort of... we just kind of really scraped the barrel, because then when you had a free gift issue, the thing is, when you got a free gift issue, it boosts the circulation, and so you'd be dropping down to 85. I mean, I'm saying this is off the top of my head, but down to 85,000. This is home sales. Remember, don't forget the Gordon and Gotch selling it in South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and wherever. So some bit of the Mediterranean, Pluto, Uranus. Why the fuck do we leave that on there for so long? It's awful, isn't it?
People still ask us why the price isn't on there for Pluto.
Yeah, well, you could say that inflation never hit because it takes too long to get there. It probably has, but
or plucks it or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's just stupid, isn't it? But once you do something like that, you stick with it, don't you? You can't be bothered to change it. It's that.
It's part of the ethos. It's like still calling them progs. It's like still saying Borak Thumb. It's the background furniture, but it's the important stuff.
I think so. It makes it fun, doesn't it? It's identity.
Zijaz Monthly.
Yeah.
You came up with the title for that, I think.
Probably because it made for a good logo.
Yeah. Well, tell us, because this was one of the kind of attempts at having a sister comic, really, wasn't it?
Well, this was the attempt at doing what we used to get, as I was saying to you earlier, these anthology titles, Italian and Spanish.
Yeah.
And lots of them reprinted Warren stuff, they reprinted all sorts of things. And they were called things like La Tenorta, or they were called Simoc, was one we used to get a lot of. I've got a few of them up there, I think I cleared a load of them out, but they have fantastic stuff done by Spanish artists.
Yeah.
Usually the stuff we didn't have. I mean, and then they'd have Warren stuff as well. And we just realised that 2000 AD stuff could slot into that, and there was also the possibility you could do longer, slightly more complex stories. And I'm not saying adult, but you could probably do slightly more sophisticated stories.
Just from that, it sounds more like your kind of Metal Hurlant kind of
style magazine. Yeah, there was that. And remember, I think Marvel wasn't. Archie Goodwin was doing Epic at the time.
Yes,
And I think I think this was slightly before they did that, but that was the idea that you go for a European kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because obviously the thing about 2000 is because of the influences on it. If you think about it, it's influenced more by American and European comics than it was by the British comics it followed.
Yeah.
Although people did like the British comics, that really and honestly the influences were American or European anyway. So more of that sort of, or it seemed it, just from a visual point of view.
Yeah.
So obviously then you'd have people that had worked on classic comics, Eric Bradbury, people like that who work for it still. And that was the idea, was to do that. And Steve, it was JMP, Juvenile New Publication, and I can't remember what number it is. I tried to remember because somebody asked me recently. David MacDonald in Ireland.
Oh yes, from Hibernia. Yeah.
And he asked me about it, and I said I can't remember what number it was. And I did have a moment of remembering what was put. He asked what was in it, and I think it was Redondo did Nemesis, didn't he?
Yeah, he did book 2.
Yeah. Well, I had photocopies of that here, and I couldn't figure out why I'd had them, and I think we might have put them in the Zarjaz dummy.
Right.
Because I couldn't figure out, because I didn't know how to keep. I mean, they were nice artwork, but I didn't keep photocopies of anything. But I found them in a folder of stuff.
Yeah.
I think it must have been from the Zarjaz comic. We had that fantastic Mickey painting of the of Slain and the Tyrannosaur on the front of it.
Oh,
that was the cover of
the one that we put on Warriors Dawn, the first collection.
And that, I think, caused controversy because that was seen before anybody else's close relatives' version of Slain that was seen for something. But that wasn't the intention, and it wasn't seen widely because it was just done for that. It's actually on the cover of one of the Time books as well, isn't it? I think it's the Slain book. And that was the cover of it, and then Zarjaz logo. I think, when you get an idea for a logo, you do the same logo every time. It's got a Z in it, you're going to do that with it.
Yeah.
But it was great, it was good, it was a good looking thing, and we had to do it, and then we just felt it was reprint to we hadn't, it was a dummy, and it really was literally a dummy. We put some stuff in, I've probably put some Casanova's artwork or something we then used in an annual or a special, because you used everything that was going, and that was the idea, but they didn't like it in the end. They didn't want to risk it because it was an unknown.
That just strikes me as odd, because you've got a comic that's selling, on a good day, 100,000 copies. For a company whose business model was, let's launch a new title, and if it doesn't do all right, we'll just fold it into another one and hopefully bring some of those that audience with it. To not want to launch a new title and maybe do the same thing.
Well, you couldn't merge because it would be a different format, so you can only merge things that are similar.
I get you.
And remember, that wasn't IPC's business model. I know this because I've been on the indoctrination course. We will publish a magazine. This is because it was in their absolute heyday. There was only 2 publishers working in this country that were really successful magazines. There was DC Thompson, who had the distribution through Menges, and then there was IPC in England. And the model was, as I was given it repeatedly, was we will do a magazine for any slot in a possible readership. So if we're going to do boat magazines, we'll do one for somebody with a tiny dinghy. We'll do one for somebody with a 20-foot boat. We'll do one for somebody with the next one. We'll do one for cabin crews. We'll do one for a luxury yacht. So you see everything that would be. So if you're going to horse magazine, you do one for a pony, and then you do horse and hounds, the rest of it. Yeah. And that was supposedly the idea, that they do something for everything. But with the comics, they had to match. So you couldn't merge a big glossy thing into you could sort of vaguely do that, but as it was the same thing anyway, it wouldn't work.
I mean, I suppose they kind of got away with it with Star-Lord, because that kind of went into a bit of trouble with its stock.
Yeah, and it didn't really work ever, did it? And it's it's a great shame, but then the stories that came out of it were some of the best stories. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And Star-Lord, yes. I think, because people have never said this, but I think Star-Lord was probably the first gay character in 2000 AD's history. That's what we reckoned at the time, because how camp could you actually be? He was so camp, and it was just like that whole...
Well, who are we talking about?
Star-Lord.
Star-Lord.
Yeah, Star-Lord really was, yeah. Yeah, and it was just too camp to be convincing, whereas you got Tharg. You can't come up with Star-Lord then. It's just not going to work, is it? It didn't work. It didn't work. Or it was based on Alvin Stardust. Have it whichever way you want.
But what was your guys' attitude towards that kind of the editorial character stuff, the Tharg and the Star-Lord and things. Was it just having a bit of fun, a bit of a mess around?
No.
Or was it just a nice bit of distance?
We
from the
were
audience?
doing kids' comics, and kids liked it, so why not?
Okay.
And the parents liked it, why not? It's a great idea. And it saves, if you look at there's reprints there, terrific and fantastic. They had Alf and Bart as the editorial staff, which is Bob Bartholomew. He knew nothing about comics. Yeah. All he wanted was the Eagle desk, and he got that when he retired. He took the original Eagle desk with him and things.
Right.
He didn't like comics, but if you go to the editorial, it was Alf and Bart. I don't know who Alf was, I'm sure somebody would tell you. They were the editorial staff of the comic. They were just tedious. It wasn't fun. It was like no fun. Having a strong editorial character just gave it sort of a rather offbeat identity. And of course with Tharg you get away with anything, which is Tharg demands that something's done in a certain way, otherwise you're sent to Mechquake. It works perfectly. A lot of the Mechquake stuff and things is obviously Kevin, because you can tell that's got that sort of that thing, and it's obviously you can have a laugh with it and things. The Tharg issue though, the original Tharg, and I think I've got one of the photographs, the mask was grey. There was only black and white photographs, so it was grey mask, the hairpiece and the thing stuck here. Kelvin's motorcycle outfit, which is still what's on that piece of film I've shown you of Steve is wearing Kelvin's motorcycle gauntlets and boots, which obviously got left when Kelvin left. But the mask, when we moved office, half an office, we had to put things in crates, because this was IPC, so you'd have to put them in crates and somebody would have to come and move them half an office. The Tharg mask went. The grey Tharg mask went. There was no Tharg mask. And we were actually, nobody knew where it had come from. So in lunchtimes, we used to go around London to appropriate places trying to find a Tharg mask. And this is true. Eventually, I went to the magic shop, which is underneath Charing Cross Station. You know the bit that always smells of piss, and there was a magic shop down there. And I went in and I went, I know this is a long shop. I'm looking, I went, oh, it's Neanderthal. What do you mean it's Neanderthal? It's a Neanderthal latex mask. Do you want one? I went, yeah. So I came back to the office with a new Tharg mask, which was, again, putty-coloured latex. And Steve knew somebody that did makeup for movies, or his girlfriend did, or something. Took it off, and that's when it was green for the first time, sprayed green. Put the rosette of Sirius on properly, proper hairpiece on that goes down the back. That's the one in that film, because the original Tharg, you can sort of see that it doesn't really, and I don't think it was very well put on there. And we redid it, and that's the Tharg Reborn. We heard about it enough to do that.
And it was still Steve having to don this thing in photos.
Well, Bert wouldn't fit the outfit, and I wasn't going to fucking do it. Come on, be realistic. I think the original photograph, it's probably Kelvin in that, because it was his outfit.
Right,
But Steve donned the rosette, and he hated plastic cups. That was the worst thing.
Watching that film, it really struck me. The only time I've ever worn that head, because we got a new one made, but you know, similar kind of.
If something happened, you could have gone and bought one for £7. So.
But you can sort of see
it's pressing on the ice,
and I came out of it with scratched corneas. It's terrible. I'm never putting that on. Al Ewing wore it. I think he might have even DJ'd in it at some 2000 AD party, and it's
a horror. Anything like
never want to put that thing.
I don't like. I mean, it's such a long time since I had a motorbike. I don't even like full face motorbike handlebars. I like a nice. I like a nice open. That is quite unpleasant to wear. Even the Monkey King mask.
Oh right, okay.
That's not good either. Right, but there's a Japanese film, which is probably. I have to be corrected on this. It's Kagemusha, which is the one about the warrior coming back and he finds a mask in a reed bed. Right. Puts the mask on and he can't get it off. I've often thought Steve, could have gone that way. I hadn't seen Steve for quite a long time, but I had really good fun. I did do a drawing for when he left, when he retired.
Right.
The publisher of whatever the rumpet of IPC was rang me up and said, will I do it? So I did a picture. So I'd done a drawing there, but I hadn't seen him in years. It was so nice. He kept me a seat at his table in case I wanted to sell anything, which I thought was really sweet.
Nice.
I bought a copy of his book later, so yeah. So it was nice.
Let's look back on the 2000 AD, your time at 2000 AD. I mean, what are your feelings about it now? How do you what place does it have within your life, your career? Was it formative? Was it the pinnacle? You know.
Well, I still like it. I wish I'd worked for it a bit more in the last few years, I suppose, if anything, but it just doesn't work like that. I like the fact that I've been texting Mickey today on the subject of Strong and Stable My Arse and Judge Dredd juxtapositions. It was when I went to that thing, and it was just, I think, at one point I was standing there at your convention having a drink and having a laugh with Dave and Mickey and Carlos. And Lucy was there, and it was great. And I just thought, this is really good. And Alan and Sue. I just read it, and I thought, it's really good because you know these people for all your life, really, and it's that sort of, and they're sort of pretty much the same, which is the thing in a lot of ways. Richer in some cases, balder in other cases, more argumentative in some cases, and craggier. But it was working. I just think it was a really good thing. I know that it was good because when people went to work on it, there wasn't a 2000 AD they all wanted to work on. They started doing it, and it became 2000 AD, if you see what I mean. It was sort of like, it wasn't like they'd all sort of aspired to work on it for years. They kind of made it, all those guys. And it was the fact that I felt lucky that the only proper job I had as a grown-up was, if you're going to have an office job, that's the office job to have. And I'd just like to say that last year, I realised I had a Reed pension from working for Reed International IPC for 5.5, 6 years. And it's $5,000 a year I get now from it, so you can't really fall back, can you? Because I figure if I live another 20 years, that's $100,000 for 6 years small pension contributions.
Excellent.
So you can't really,
Well, that's 1980s publishing pension schemes.
Absolutely, because the rest of them are rubbish. All the freelance ones you get.
Well, I'm surprised Maxwell didn't.
I didn't let him have mine. Lots of people did.
Right.
Because he robbed the pension fund. It was the Mirror Group, and that was part of the same thing. No, I stuck with Reed, which is obviously they've been putting money into the little pot for all these years for me, which is really nice. I've told a couple of other people that only had jobs like that for a few years doing things. I think Alan went, or worked as a gardener for Edinburgh City Council. I said, well, you got a pension then, because everybody had to have a, you never know. So I'm sure that you should go back and suggest that you'd like to see your employers putting more money into your pension. So when you're old and... I'm not sure how well that will get out. But your father was a minister, though, so they can have no great expectations of being looked after, can they?
Well, that is true. Let's move on to. You've talked about Eagle because Dave Hunt was the editor there, and you did Computer Warrior. Now I have very fond memories of Computer Warrior because this was it was John and Alan under a pseudonym.
Yes,
and it was essentially riffing off that whole kind of ZX Spectrum kind of
very much this.
I mean, it's something we probably could never reprint because the copyright would be a nightmare.
I don't even want to go near it.
I said I have very fond memories of it.
Actually, David MacDonald, he liked that, or his kid liked it, or somebody had been reading it. Somebody had liked reading old copies of it.
It's good.
It's a kid's story.
It's a kid's story, but it's because it's a different thing every single week. It's the same idea, and certainly when we've been going through the IPC Youth Group Archive, there are certain, particularly comedy strips, where it is the same joke every single week, and that can get tedious. But the thing about Computer Warriors,
Bob Painter wasn't really very funny. He was a nice bloke, and he looked like he should be, but he didn't really have very many funny ideas.
But with Computer Warrior, it was a fresh strip every single, because one time it'd be, he'd be a samurai, the next one he'd be a cowboy.
Absolutely. It was good. It was good fun. And of course, what was really good about that is I was doing 5 pages a week, which is always good. And if you're doing that 4 or 5 pages a week or whatever you're drawing, it's great because it's really good. It's really good practice. I think what did I do with it? I think I've got a few. I've got some of the artwork still. I think I threw some stuff away. I think. Detective Zed was the next.
Well, that's the thing I was going to ask.
Okay, I'm the only one that hadn't seen Inspector. No, actually, Alan hadn't seen Inspector Gadget. John had. Alan and I were blissfully unaware. Truthfully, I had no idea that this was just totally ripped off from a cartoon. So that was pretty stupid. Obviously, it was quite good practice for drawing stupid hats and coats, but it was nice. The nice thing was, they liked it in Eagle. The kids liked it, and that's one of those, isn't it? If the kids like it, it's absolutely fine. You know, that's the.
I mean, in terms of your style, in terms of, you know, you talked about the practice of doing sequential artwork, wanting to get better. Did you see a steady improvement over this period? Were you happy about how things were?
No, I just like everything I've ever drawn.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I just like everything. And every time I draw something, I hope it'll be better than last time.
Right.
Sometimes I look at things, bits of things, and I go, that's not as bad as you remember it. But generally, I just kind of... Yeah, just constantly. That's what you do. You're just self-critical, and you just go. And I know the bits that are right. As I told you with the Bogeyman, every time it's been reprinted, I go back and change a few bits.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that it's tricky when you're doing it, because of course you're doing it to make a living, and you're doing it with we'd had a baby by the time I was still. I mean, we've had 2 babies since we're still doing that. They're not babies, though. You know. We've got a doctor and a medical student now, you know, to work, we've gone through. But the thing is, you were doing it to make a living, and you had to pay the mortgage and everything. And people were quite strict about things like that. You couldn't default on anything, and you had to just keep going and things. And of course, sometimes you want to spend more time and make it better. And if you ask anybody, if you ask Kev, I mean, Kev used to work working nights a lot of the time if you wanted to talk to him. People just used to work at all the hours going. And the sensible person was Dave, because Dave used to go, I work during the day and I don't work in the evenings, and that's my family time and things. And he was always had a much more sensible attitude to it. But the rest of you just sit there and do it till you're...
Well, that was the Ron Smith principle, that there's a certain amount of time you have to do this page, and when the timer goes, you stop.
No, because he did that, but he would do that, he'd do it, and then he'd go through all the pages when he'd finish, and finish off all the pages things.
But I think he said that would be in his own time, you know, that would be a Sunday evening or whatever. No, they were disciplined about it, but then look at the guy. I mean, look at some of the artwork that you see, the old stuff from the. You know, look at the old Valiant artwork and things. There's so much work in that stuff that people just put lots of hours in and things. And you just had to do it, because of course the other thing you have to remember is it wasn't, when you per page rate and everything, it's very well paid. And it's quite funny that in the last time I worked when I went freelance, I was getting paid £85 a page. And the last time I drew a page for 2000 AD, I got £120. Now, I reckon that 30 years later, either it was a lot at the start, or it hasn't moved on and things. It's a weird thing, that rates, because if you actually read, there's a book about Eagle, so an advertising guy did it, and the rates they got paid in the 50s for doing that are astonishing, because basically a page of artwork was equivalent to an editor's salary for a week, and that was the balance. But it's you were getting quite well paid for doing it. You just had to do more if you wanted more money. Is basically the bottom line. I know now people retrospectively get royalties and things, but the thing is, people aren't drawing that much now. There's not that much being done new. It's basically royalties on stuff. If they did stuff, I mean, I know that people do extremely well. I know I've got a pretty good idea of the sort of royalties that Carlos and John will be getting, and Alan less so. I know what Mickey gets, because vaguely. So it's that sort of. Depends how much you drew then, I suppose. I can claim mine every 2 years because it has to be £100 before I get it. No, I did need some money one year, and he did say, well, it was 90, and he said I could have it if I wanted it very kindly, but I didn't need it in the end, so it's fine. I mean, what you said you don't like the stuff that you've drawn. What is it about it that you don't?
I like to see the faults in it and things. I mean, sometimes you see something and you think, well, that's okay. And some of the jobs, if you do an advertising job, I mean, like, weirdly, the last advertising job I did was marketing packaging job. When you're at art college, one of the things you do is, in fact, I did cigar package. You in the 70s, it was do a cigarette packet, and you think, I'm never going to draw a cigarette packet. I was working for Lucky Strike for best part of a year and a half ago, doing drawings for cigarette packets, which I think I probably got in at the end of drawings for cigarette packets, not for this country, I hasten to add. So the stuff like that, and then I did. I spent a happy week trying to redesign the Jägermeister logo. So those sort of jobs, I look at those things, I go, they're great. I quite like those things. And I like the general effect of things. Like at the moment, I'm doing a comic with Alan. We did a comic which was for a Scottish charity a couple of years ago. It's about a boy it's a real boy, but he's autistic. And it was the only things he responded to were horror comics and science fiction comics. And so Alan got Scott, interviewed him, and wrote this thing which is about zombies taking over Edinburgh, which was to highlight Scott's issues, reality. Now, because of the PIP assessments for people with mental health issues, he's having to go through all this stuff, all this absolutely intrusive stuff to prove that he needs help, financial help. So we're doing Scott versus Demons now. Which is, but it's still raising money, but it's really cool. I mean, the first thing Alan was doing it, and lots of writers in Scotland, writers and poets all contributed to this. Ian Rankin, famously, the detective writer, has a son who I believe has some unfortunate issues. He contributed to it. Alan was asked to do it because he's a national legend, and he's a living star in Scotland, but of course he can't draw, so he had to get someone to draw it. So the girl that did it, like the Bogeyman, she said, "Well, I draw it," so I drew it, and I'm doing the next one now. And I like that because it's worthwhile and things. But I looked at it and thought, I don't know how to draw. That's awful, isn't it? It's like, you can't do it better. And it's just that you just keep doing it. The thing is, if you're going to not do that, you might as well stop and you just keep going like that, and the odd bits come out okay and things. I've also done lots of things like storyboards and things like that. They work if the client likes them, and that's how that sort of works.
Well, it's something that came out of when I had a chat with McMahon, the whole thing about he never feels comfortable about ever resting on his laurels because he's worried that he's got to be like a shark. You've always got to keep moving forward, otherwise you'll drown.
The thing is, Mickey's approach to his, I know he's my friend and things, but he's the most remarkable artist. The fact that he manages to develop and to change and to move on and to, I think like a lot of people would say about Mickey, he's probably too overcritical of the stuff he does because he does something that's absolutely fantastic and it's not good enough for him. He moves on and things. But he is phenomenally. All those artists are all great. Yeah. But Mickey there's something exceptional about the way he approaches things, which is different. And in some ways, it's the same way as Kevin does it, which is somewhere between being a cartoonist and being a comics artist. There's a movement and things in what they do. It's not. It keeps on changing, and it's still got that feeling about it. No, I love him. I mean, when Mickey does stuff, I get him to send me whatever it is because it's usually inspirational. And in fact, the cover I was talking about, the one for the Burger Wars and things, I think it's the best piece of artwork I've seen in years. It's the most fantastic thing. And of course, it'll bring it on a phone or an iPad, doesn't it? It's a gorgeous thing. Yeah. So
let's talk about the Bogeyman. Which, for anyone listening who hasn't read it, it's basically a guy in an insane asylum in Glasgow.
Outside Glasgow,
who is under the delusion that he is an amalgam of all of Humphrey Bogart's characters.
It's more than that. He is.
Oh, he is. Okay, sorry.
It's not identifiable as being anything. He is. Yeah. Basically, Humphrey Bogart's everybody thinks of Humphrey Bogart in character, or absolutely not.
Yeah. But it's him impressing his version of reality onto a slightly unforgiving world.
Yeah, everything fits, doesn't it? It was John and Alan wanted to do. I think it was a photo strip they were doing for when they tried to do boys' photo strip stuff in one of the comics. Probably. Yeah. And they wanted to do this character, which was basically a gumshoe detective, because they liked doing because John liked doing what he thinks sounds authentically American, but the rest of us know just sounds Scottish, right? And it's a bit like when those two tried to do imitations of, say, Kelvin Gosnell, and what it is Jockney. It's like what a Scot thinks a Cockney sounds like, but nobody else knows what the hell it's supposed to be. It's that. Okay. Yeah. So I knew they had this thing, and they wanted to. I think they shot a few bits of this and things, and. We started going up to Glasgow and doing signings and things, 2000 AD, because it was a big Scottish fan thing. So we did, of our own bat, decided to go up and we go to a signing at the local comic mart at the library or whatever. And it became big. I mean, that's turned into a proper convention eventually. And we go up, and there was money floating around in Glasgow because it was the Year of Culture coming up, European City of Culture. And the guys up there that did the comic things, two of them, John McShane and George Jackson, was a musician and traditional musician, had a record shop and business and band and things. They decided they wanted to get some of this money, put some money into publishing. John McShane said to me, "What are we going to do?" And I I thought science fiction-y. I fancied doing a futuristic version of Glasgow, because that's the sort of thing. If you ask an artist what he wants to draw, you go, I'd like to do a futuristic version of Glasgow. You know, it's that thing. Or I'd like to do some knights, or perhaps some soldiers fighting. You know, it's that sort of what you do draw. And it wasn't really kind of coming off. And then I said, well, John and Alan got this idea. Why don't we? Because there was a degree of whether this guy was mentally ill. The guy that thinks he's Humphrey Bogart. Yeah. And I said, I'll talk to them. And I rang up Alan and John, whichever one I saw next, and said, why can't we set that in Scotland? Why don't we set it in Glasgow? Because I know John wanted to do that. They were doing Midden-Face McNulty and stuff like that. They wanted to do Scottish stuff. Yeah. And they said, yeah, good, that was a good idea. So we decided to do that. So there was the Bogart spoof, because there have been a few, because there's a Steve Martin film where he pretends to be, there's a Steve Martin film where he pretends to be Bogart and things, something like Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, I think. That. Okay. So it seemed like quite a reasonable thing to do. And then it just went from... So we did the Bogeyman, which obviously is funny. John and Alan do reckon it's the funniest thing they've written. I think it's certainly the oddest thing that we should have thought of doing in the first place.
I'll be honest with you, it does seem like an odd prospect.
It was a very strange thing. Scots love it. People that have never read a comic love it. They just like it. It just because it's written in Scottish, I think, is the thing. I don't understand a word of it because nobody's ever told me. They did the glossary, but a muck glossary. And they just liked it. And at the time, it just went down because nobody'd ever done something as strange as that. And I liked it because I drew Glasgow in it. I was obviously not futuristic Glasgow. So I did do things like when there's a car chase, I did actually do it so you could authentically go around the one-way system in the car chase. It was that. And it was just funny. It was just very funny. I liked doing it. And it was just stupid doing an independent comic because everybody was trying to do independent comics, remember? Yeah. And some of them thought they were doing The Watchmen. So what do we do? The Bogeyman. That didn't work, did it? So people were doing... Yeah, the idea was you could do something independent. And it was creator-owned as well was the idea. So...
It did come to... I think I read an interview. It came to be known as the Scottish comic in the house because it finished off so many publishers.
And so many people died. I mean, the original George Jackson, the original publisher, died. One of the Pete Root, a lovely guy up there, was one of the guys who used to come and see, died. Right. Well, in Scotland, in Glasgow, there's quite a low death rate, age and things. Yeah, that's right. It finished off and it did us. It did Batman Press, which I like to say I named the company, what do you want to call it? George was quite poorly, so Batman Press worked well. Then John Brown had it, but John Brown's pretty indestructible. I'll tell you John Brown in a minute. But John Brown reprinted it for us because I think it was probably because his marketing director, Maddie, used to be friends with Frank Pirate and played softball with us, and I think in the end that's how we got the into John Brown because he was looking for things to do. Right. I thought it was going to be his golf magazine, I think, originally, and then he took it somewhere else. So we did that. Then I think Tundra, it helped launch Tundra. I don't know, there was all sorts of stuff went on and things. So there's lots of versions of it. Then DC were kind enough to pay us to do it again and things. The BBC did it, of course, with Robbie Coltrane. Yeah. He managed to fuck it beyond recognition by acting like he was doing it on purpose. He just messed with the script. But interesting, after doing that, Robbie Coltrane did go off and do Cracker, which, involved Scottish people, Robbie Coltrane, and mental health issues. So, I think he'd probably figure that one out. And then the BBC never showed it again. They showed it twice and that was it.
Well, that was this kind of transition between being a comedian and being a serious actor.
Even less funny than he was. So. It was good in those. It was produced. The Bogeyman thing was produced by John Byrne, though, who also did Tutti Frutti and My Aching Heart. Those two wonderful things they did in the Scottish things with Robbie Coltrane as well. So I think John Byrne had quite an influence on it, and he's quite an interesting bloke because he's a painter as well as married to Tilda Swanton, isn't he? But they have do you not know this? He's an interesting bloke. He's one of those blokes that does a bit of everything and things. Right. John Byrne. Do you know those? I don't know if you've seen these documentaries, What Artists Do All Day. There's one of them which is about Scottish artist Thingy.
Frank Quitely.
But if you find those, there's one about John Byrne as well. They're quite interesting, actually. They're all of them. I can recommend them, actually. They're a good way of wasting. It's what artists do all day, isn't it? It's a good way of wasting time. So, yeah. So we did the Bogeyman. Yeah. It went down well, and it's just caused... And I was just trying to do that. I remember trying to get some payment with a child in a pram in Glasgow at a record shop, and they offered me cassettes instead of... And I was going, look...
I like a bit of fiddly diddly music occasionally, but really, honestly, we've got to pay a mortgage and things, so that was a bit sort of. And then that was so successful. We then stupid enough to do it again, and then we did the stupid colour one because of the controversy with John and Alan deciding to do it for Jeff Fry at whatever his company was called. Toxic. We put in Toxic, but then that was in contravention of my copyright, so that was abandoned, and I redrew that story that Kennedy had started doing.
Was that China 2?
I think it became. Did it become? Was it China 2? Or was it?
No, it wasn't. No. To Casablanca.
No, it wasn't.
Well, no?
It wasn't. It was the one-off thing where he goes to America and kidnaps Dan Quayle.
Of course he does.
Sorry. There is one copy of it, so I give it you, but I can't. There's only one copy of it. But it was the most stupid thing. Actually, there's 2 copies. I think I've got to send the other ones around there. It's that one. It's the one that involved Bogeyman. Which has nothing to do with the Bogeyman whatsoever.
How bizarre.
It just looks cute.
A Lexington special.
Yeah, absolutely. God, if they'd only known, we could have kept it till now. Imagine what we could have done. So that was, I think, the one that was there. And then we did Chinatoon, which I really like. Chinatoon, actually, I read it the other day, and it actually still makes me laugh a bit with the fairy pistol and the fireworks at the end of it.
Yeah.
So that's okay. Then we did Return to Casablanca, which should have been called Casablanca, but John wasn't having it because he didn't think of it. Well, Casablanca, it screamed, isn't it, to be done. So yeah, so we did that. So Bogeyman's been done quite a lot. So
it caused a bit of bad blood. The issue over Cam being brought in to draw it.
Well, I don't think it was bad blood. I haven't spoken to Cam since because he'd stayed at my house before.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah, that was like I took that as you've dirtied my towels and not having that again.
Without sort of dwelling too much on it, looking back on that, what are your feelings towards the Bogeyman? Because you said it still makes you laugh.
Well, we've done it. We did it since. Now it's all gone again, but we did then do more Bogeyman. And I still quite like it. I really, really, really wanted to do the Bogeyman for the Commonwealth Games.
Right.
I'd really suggested we did that, but I couldn't get any enthusiasm from anyone else. I've also suggested a newspaper strip over the years on the fact that now to do a newspaper strip and syndicate is easy because you can do it from your computer.
Sure.
I then suggested that we did a poster of Nicholas Sturgeon and what was the guy, the previous leader of the Scottish Party? The one that looks very much like a mixture of Sydney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre.
Now you're asking him. It's gone straight out of my head.
Yeah, exactly that thing.
Formerly with SNP, can't remember.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so I've suggested a few things over the years. Now I think we are going to do a poster or two, so I did actually dig some of the artwork out and start looking at it and things. So I think, who knows, we might possibly do it. John said we'll never do it again, but then he's quite old now, so I mean, he's going to die, isn't he? So you can leave that in, it's fine. No, we could, if there was a funny idea, because it is funny, and it's some of the funniest stuff that he and Alan have ever written, best together, I think. It is, actually.
I mean, it's one of the things that survived the breakup of their writing partnership, because you had that period where they kind of went their separate ways after the last America that they did with Nick, but they've continued to write.
That would be nice. It would be nice if anybody reprinted that and sent me a copy of it, wouldn't it?
No comment.
Okay. They did. They've done bits. I think how the dynamic used to be that John and Alan used to do things and they were pretty inseparable. I think it's been John and Carlos with the Dredd stuff in the last few years. I think that's probably, I don't really know, you'd have to ask them that and things.
Let's talk about what you've been doing since, because you did Green Candles, which was for the abortive...
Randy Helfer.
The graphic mysteries line.
I did all the big books of things.
Right.
And then I did Green Candles, but they reprinted the Bogeyman, you see.
Right.
So yeah, they wanted some stuff. And Green Candles it's it's the longest thing that was quite the same I've ever done.
Right.
There's so much of it.
Okay. Well, for those who are listening who don't know anything about it, tell us a little bit.
It was written by a guy I think his name is Tom DeHaven. They did a series of books. John wrote. What did John do? There was 2 successful books that came out of it. One was History of Violence, was one that I think was made into a film. And there's a film with there's another one as well. The two of them got made into films. Green Candles didn't. It's a story about false memory and abuse, basically, and false memory and abuse and unpleasantness and things. I think I drew it. I think that's what it was about. It was very long. I suspect it was being written. I think it was written as probably a TV movie synopsis or something. So I did it. I was very happy to do it because working for DC is absolutely lovely, and Andy Helfer was a very nice guy to work for, and the other Joel Rose, his assistants, are great. He's a very clever writer. And so I quite like working for DC. It was lovely. DC were really nice. I mean, I've got a silk Superman dressing gown. I've got a watch. I've got lots of really good books. I've got DC. They were really good. They just treated their talent or employees extremely well. They also did things which I still love Andy Helfer for, which when I'd done Green Candles, there was 3 books and they lost the entire artwork for one book. I think it was about 90 pages a book. And they just paid me for it again. I tried sending the other 2 boxes back and saying, you lose these as well. No, he wasn't having any of it. So, yeah. But it wasn't very interesting. The big books were great to do, though. Didn't pay very well. It was quite annoying. The reason I think that whole line didn't make any money is because Andy would FedEx pages back and forward, just one page in a FedEx parcel. Right. And so I think all the money was long since gone before the books were published. And they were great fun because you got to draw a great thing. The first one I did was the Big Book of Weirdos. I got to draw 6 pages on Aleister Crowley, which is brilliant. Right. And then I did Aleister Crowley. The rule was about the books. You could only do one story in each book, and loads of artists did them and things. And Andy Helfer rang me. He said, I've got 1 page left to do. And he said, and it's a bloke, I don't really know anything about him. It's called Screaming Lord Such. And I said, well, Andy, the only time I haven't voted Labour in my life was in a European election in Islington. I voted Monster Raving Loony. So can I try? And he went, oh, go on then. Okay. So I got to draw 1 page of Screaming Lord Such as well in the book. But it was great. I did a thing about Edgar Allan Poe and stuff about the Kennedy conspiracy. I've drawn Kennedy's head from both angles, and stuff like that. Great fun to do. That was really nice, but they didn't pay, and they were supposed to reprint, and I've got them reprinted in Turkish and Greek and things, but there's never been a penny in royalties because I think it was all used with Andy's FedEx habit. Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about this period from the end of the 90s through to now. What's your career been like? What are the kind of things that you've been doing? Because I think you did a few years of Doctor Who, didn't you? Inking Doctor Who comics.
5 years.
5 years.
5 years. Right. Yeah, and I managed to do 5 years of the Doctor Who that nobody ever wants to see again. Would you like some artwork? No, here, have some more. Yeah, it was quite hard to ink because he had that curly hair as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, this is just Sylvester McCoy stuff.
No, I wouldn't have.
Tom Baker.
No, keep going. The last one.
The last one.
The McGann boy.
Oh, really?
They got 5 years out of McGann.
Good God.
Yeah, really. I know, because I used to sit here and go, if I have to do this again, Lucy, I'm going to die. And the weird thing is, we moved here to Tunbridge Wells, and Marvel UK were based here. They're in the Pantiles. They were, like a quarter of a mile that way.
Yeah.
And they're somewhere here still because it's Panini. So
yeah.
So I did that for a long time. They said, "Oh, you can draw one. You can draw it. And they let me do 2 pictures of his planet eventually, and then they went on to a better Doctor Who, and everybody wanted to do it. So it was that. Yeah, but you do it. You just, as I said, you do it. I mean, you do it. That was playing for a house to be modernised. It's that sort of. You do it like that.
Is it been very much as you've already said, the kind of you take the jobs that come up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I try and do it less. I did work for Redan for a long time, so I've done lots. I mean, when people talk about mindfulness and colouring, if you've done as much colouring as I do, it's the last thing you do. You try and find something on Radio 4. The last thing you want to do is think while you're doing it. Yeah. I've done lots of stuff like that. I did loads of stuff. Because Jenny O'Connor used to give me loads of work. So I've been around the Letterland alphabet 3 times, drawing and colouring stuff on that and things. I've done quite a lot of rainbow furries. I've dabbled over the years with colouring things like My Little Pony and Wombles and all that sort of stuff. All the stuff. I always wanted them to do a Wombles versus My Little Pony kind of Secret Wars thing. Because we know that the Wombles have got teeth somewhere, you just can't see them. It's that. So I did lots of stuff like that. And then just advertising stuff. So I've done, storyboards for computer games. Al and I did Lego stuff for a while. That was good fun. Because, when they started doing them, Lego games, they had to have the animated sequences in between the gameplay and stuff. Yeah. So they'd have to do it. So I got to storyboard some of those. So we had Lego castles in the house and things. That was always very entertaining. Yeah, no, they liked it. It was good because the Lego castle came, but it was the Lego castle they'd used for the publicity photographs. So some of it was stuck together. It all was labelled and things. So that was good. It was quite good fun doing that actually. I did lots of work for Muller, the dairy people. I designed their kids' stuff. Right. As I said, I was doing Lucky Strike stuff. I just like anything that just sort of... There's some of the stuff I've forgotten. You forget you're doing and things. It's like at the moment, somebody's just asked me to do some drawings for Elite, which is a role-playing game that somebody's redoing. They're doing a crowdfunding thing on it at the moment. So I'm going to do some drawings for that. It's just like anything that comes up. And then odd bits, and every so often I email Matt Smith and say, how about some work? And every so often I think about once every 3 years, he says, you want to do this? But yeah. At the convention, Sue Grant and I were trying to find Matt Smith and realised that neither of us knew what he looked like. So I truthfully had to look him up on my telephone, identified him, and then we figured out he was doing a talk. So we went and stood. I'm sorry, Matt, if you hear this. We went and stood at the end of it, and I was going to take a photograph so we could remember. But somebody saw what we were doing and closed the door. But I'm told he's quite shy at these things, which I don't blame him for.
He's not, again, sorry, Matt, he's not the most forward of people.
No, I don't blame him for those things. That's why that's why I wouldn't go on a panel or anything, because I figure there's gobbier people than I am, and they, I figure with things like that, you can only get yourself into trouble if you go and sit on a panel. It's probably not the same now.
I think everybody did okay at the 40th.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody said anything.
Everybody was charming and lovely. They're all good. And Pat was like a whirling dervish. I've never used that expression before, but it's suited.
So, I mean, we've already talked a little bit about how you view years at 2000 and your feelings towards your own artwork. Is your career something that you feel fulfilled by? Do you think the career that you've had is the one that you've wanted?
I think you just keep on doing whatever you're doing and think about it. Think you could be like Steve Dillon or Brett, or you don't. You just do what you're doing, and lots of other things come along. You have a family, you have children that do what they're doing successfully. You're a parent. Yeah. You never actually have to lose a mortgage. You never have to sell the house because you can't afford it. You just about, obviously you have to get the car done by a bloke called Reg, but we won't even use his name. But no, it's sort of, I'd like to have drawn more interesting things, but I think, I regret the passing of the proper comics industry. I like that when I went freelance, or even when I worked. I've done stuff for Tiger, Roy the Rovers, Battle, Action, all those comics. Oh, no, it's Battle Action, not Action. There was lots of work you could do. If you weren't drawing what you wanted to draw, you find something else to draw instead. I'd really like to have done something where I could have drawn more, like most of us, more historical, more, action stuff. I've drawn far too many things. Dave once was doing an interview and he was asked about aspiring artists, and he said, well, when you want to draw comics, what you think you're going to be drawing is the Hulk and the Thing battling on Brooklyn Bridge. Well, in fact, you get your first script and it says, taxi draws up in a busy street and man gets out. Well, I've drawn far too many taxis, busy streets, and men getting out of them. Yeah. So if I never had to draw anybody in a suit, again, I would be pretty...
or a trench coat, for example.
Yeah, I could probably do it, one more time. I might just do it. But I've drawn lots of that sort of stuff. Yeah. And it's not really it's not as exciting. You'd like to draw something a bit more, like 2000 AD in its heyday, I suppose. It's that, you still like to draw that stuff. I think I'm still going to have to do this. I mean, Ian Kennedy was 87, so I've got another 27 years to do this. So, there's still,
I think you're still going strong.
Yeah, you just keep on doing it, don't you? Yeah. I mean, that's the thing.
Looking back at that kid in Port Sunlight, devouring Marvel and DC comics and whatever.
The only comics I've got from, because I got rid of all those comics.
Yeah.
And the comics I've had the longest are from about 10 years later, from the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
And they are Neil Adams comics from that period.
Yeah.
And then the Jack Kirby comics when he went to DC. So all of that stuff and things. And they're the oldest comics. I've got some old reprint stuff and things, but I look at those and I think, I'm quite fond of these still. They're familiar, but they're nice. There's that thing. Kevin, there's a page of Neil Adams' X-Men there. That's what Kevin gave me for a wedding present.
Wow.
Which is not bad. There's a Mickey. I'll show you the Mickey page downstairs as well. So, which I've always liked.
I mean, how do you feel about having been that kid, reading those comics as a child, and then getting to have a career in the thing that you wanted to do? I mean,
it's quite fun, isn't it?
Yeah,
enjoy it. It's enjoyable. It's better than having a job, isn't it?
Well, exactly.
Sometimes it's frustrating. Yeah. Sometimes you worry because you're not getting enough work. But there's always something that comes up and you'd end up doing some work. Or you do something you do a really well-paid job, be it cigarette packets or whatever. You don't worry about it for a while until something else starts coming up. And then, of course, it all comes up at once and you end up having to work and remembering how to do it. It's that thing. It's not as... Some of the things aren't quite as hard as they used to be. So a lot of the thing was about... The thing you asked about producing artwork in the first place. Half the battle used to be finding Bristol board, finding Indian ink, finding a decent brush. It was all that sort of stuff you used to battle. And of course, it's not so bad now because you can draw it in pencil, and you can ink it on the computer, you can do it like that, and it sort of takes some of the pressure off the sort of the craft of it. I mean, the fact is, occasionally I do draw something still properly, just to remind me that I can still do it. I can still ink with a brush and things, and it's still a pleasure to do it. It's really nice to draw, and it's that. The fact that you don't have to worry about when the post office is open now, because computers are such that you can send large files, and that's such a recent thing. I mean, I think when we moved here, because I was working for Redan, I was doing quite a lot of work. I think my last job was to run down to the post office by the station, because it was a Safeways there, and I could catch the 6:30 post if I ran. It was that, and you don't have to do. It's not having to do that sort of stuff. It's good. So things are more relaxed about it. And I think the stuff you can do on the Mac and things is astonishing. Not having to colour by hand is pretty good. I mean, I was looking at some old artwork, and I was going, my God, you even airbrush that. I hate the airbrush, but you had to do it if you wanted a particular thing.
I think that's one of the reasons why, as we were talking about earlier, I maintain a great kind of romantic affection for the way the industry was, that I was not involved in any way, that I had no experience of, but I've heard through stories of, artists coming down, delivering their artwork, everyone going to the pub. Even though at the beginning of my journalistic career, if I went to the pub at lunchtime, I'd fall asleep at my keyboard. But
that's why I wouldn't drink at lunch. Christmas Day is the only day I'll drink at lunchtime. Right now,
but now, Simon Davis is the only person who comes to the office to deliver his stuff, and that's because he paints. Whereas everybody else emails it in, and
it's not as much fun, is it? Though.
No, I don't.
No, I can see that.
So. Don't get me wrong. We all love working at 2000 AD. It's great fun.
No, it's not.
But that kind of social aspect.
Well, that's where I felt lucky, because you got to see all these guys. I mean, I started to say earlier, Carlos would come in, he'd give me a drawing lesson. It's just nice, it's lovely. He'd just say something and he'd do it. And I told you, Mike Dory would give me a drawing lesson by leaving whatever he was supposed to have finished drawing. It's that, and it was nice. It was that nice thing, and it was like, you'd hear, it's like David come in with some great idea, which was using cotton buds to put out large areas of black on, which might have worked when they were rolled waxed paper, but now they're a plastic tube. All that happens is the ink sucks up onto your hand and you try. Only because I tried to do something with one recently, it's that. But there would be that thing: what is the latest board? What's the latest pens? Where do you get a decent, sort of? I mean, I've found a packet of Strathmore Bristol board that Dave brought in from America, and I needed some as well. So, and that's still sitting there because, of course, then things changed. We didn't need anyway. It's that. I think it was fun, but it's like people try to do it so an artist and writer works together. The thing is that doesn't really work because the writer can piss off in no time, and the artist has to labour over it for hours and hours and hours. So there's a good bit and a bad bit about that. And there's also the American way of doing it, where you used to, well, it's different now, but an artist and a pencil and ink would work together on things. Some of that was quite fun, but it was just to get more done in the same length of time. Yeah. Whereas the other thing with people just coming in, that was just the pleasure of they were interesting and entertaining. Yeah.
And you, like I said, you were there at that critical sort of early 80s period where Steve would come on as editor and 2018 was. I mean, that is its original heyday. That's the first golden age.
It was I think it was about a year and a half old when I started on this and things. Yeah, no, it was different. It was a different thing because it was, as I'm saying, it became 2000 AD. It was just a comic that people could work on through their agents and things. Yeah. But only did people go, I want to be able to do that and do that and do that and things. And it sort of changed like that.
It does. From what you've said, it does sound very much that you had a remarkable amount of freedom, possibly because IPC didn't give a tinker's cuss, possibly because Barry didn't give a tinker's cuss about it either. So if you wanted to push the boundaries, you could a little bit. If you wanted to do, dress up paper dolls of Dredd and Rogue Trooper and slay them, you could. If you wanted to put a picture of Massimo Belardinelli on the back as a robot, then you could.
As long as it wasn't going to upset anybody that would complain to the managing director of IPC. I think that's pretty much the thing. Yeah. I can tell you one story about that was there was an agent called Mr. Hall, and he represented Ron Turner, who was, did Rick Random, was it? I always mix up which was Kevin's spoof of it and which one was... No, Rick Random's the
Random, yeah.
And we could never tell whether Ron Turner was a real person or Mr. Hall was both people. We suspected that Ron Turner wanted really to have been retired, but Mr. Hall wouldn't let him. And Mr. Hall used to make our life a fucking misery because he'd ring up and he'd be so critical and he'd do things to Steve. I think he'd say, I'm going to tell him, I'm friends with the managing director, I'm going to tell him. And I think Steve said his dad knew the man. I can't remember. He said, I'm going to tell you, you can't do that. And he'd be on the phone to Steve, and Steve would get frustrated. I mean, this is how he went through typewriters and desks. Yeah. I have to be polite still, because that was, you've got to be polite. Yeah. And Steve would take this shit off this guy, and it's like, then you've lost an hour on a crucial day or something, and everything sort of, gets sort of more tense and things. So Mr. Hall rang up one lunchtime. There was Cole White and I in the office, and Mr. Hall started his usual fucking diatribe. And well, Steve, he's gone for lunch. Well, he should be in the office. He's the editor. And he just gave me all this. I just went, look, we're trying to do a job here. We'll do it properly. If Steve wants to go for his lunch, that's absolutely fine. You just make a pain in the arse of yourself, and really, I think the best thing you can do is just fuck off and let people get on with the job. And Cole's just going, and Mr. Hall said to me, who am I speaking to? And I said, Colin Wyatt. I reminded Colin, and he said I didn't sleep soundly for quite a long time afterwards. So there was things like, there was all like these weird people who suddenly turned up. There were throwbacks to bits of IPC. There was this bloke called, what's his name? Melvin something. Well, he'd turn up, but you'd have to be careful because he'd just steal things as he was in the office. And there's all this weird, these weirdos that would just kind of just turn up, and there was just this just a general odd thing. And then Tom obviously knew some quite odd people as well, but that was a different story. Yeah. No, it was funny, but do you know the thing you can't get is how people used to manage to function after going on those absolute benders.
Yeah.
You'd have to be in the office the next day. I've got to say this, I had a reputation for getting in late. I used to be in for about 11, so we only had to start at 10 o'clock, for Christ's sake. This is how reasonable this was.
This sounds very familiar.
Yeah, I'd get in for 11 pretty much normally. But, to be fair, I would stay there till everything was done.
Yeah.
And I used to like working in the King's Reach Tower when everybody had gone home at 5:30, because you had peace and quiet. They turned off the air conditioning, which is a good thing. So the silence, it was silent. And you could just work there, and everything was there if you needed, and you just worked in peace. And I always liked that, because it was always more productive to get on and get stuff done, because there's no phone calls to interrupt you and things.
Yeah.
And John Wagner told me how to get away with this from his DC Thompson days. He said, look, when you come in, if you're late and you think there's anybody going to be around in the office, what you do, take your jacket off, leave it downstairs in the foyer, or leave it somewhere else. Roll your sleeves up and just go into the office, because people, if you go in with your shirt sleeves, assume you've already been there so early they missed you. And that's a really great John Wagner's,
Note to self.
Yeah.
Roll sleeves up.
Yeah, of course it worked, a place like that.
Yeah.
Worked beautifully. So, that's pure John, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, told a story about an agent who used to bother Steve, and then they suddenly stopped calling. It might have been Mr. Hall. Suddenly stopped calling one day, and they just assumed he died.
That's probably Mr. Hall, because I told him to fuck off. Sorry, Colin told him to fuck. It could be. It could be. Colin's stories are... do you know... What you need to do is do an interview with Colin Wyatt. I'm not sure that it's good on 2000, but everything else Colin ever did is the best stuff. The Colin stories are just the absolute best. They go back to the early days. He lives in Canvey Island, right?
Okay.
Just in case you need to know in future.
Yeah.
And there's things like he had a bubble car, and he and his girlfriend Jan were in the bubble car. And they drove it into our garage, and he stored it up against the wall. And they had to wait there. So Paul tells me a story like that in Stone. He said, I'm pissing myself laughing until Jan's dad came back. What are you doing? And I said, well, that's the thing of bubble car. He said, yeah, but the first day I took it out, I got it stuck under a wheel arch of a brand new Ford Anglia going round to Bramber. And stuff like that with Colin is just... When he lost the Harold Hare artwork off the back of his scooter... Yeah, when they were playing in the office, and there was Mickey Mouse artwork, because it's when they used to publish Mickey Mouse, and he knocked a bottle of black ink over a page of Mickey Mouse artwork when Gil Page was the editor of this. Yeah. Gil was not best pleased. Colin actually painstakingly, and I can believe he'd do this, painted with white gouache all the white back into that artwork. Okay? God. Stuff like that is just, stuff, Colin stories like that is just like, and there's lots and lots of those sort of stories.
That kind of knocks the whole kind of, covering up of a bit of a Jesus Redondo boob kind of thing.
Everybody's done that stuff and things. Yeah, we all did that.
Alert! 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 Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the galaxy's greatest comic at 2000ADonline.com.